The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds of Fort Hood, Texas. The air already carried the promise of another scorching day, but at 0600 hours, there was still a hint of coolness in the breeze. Dust kicked up beneath the treads of an M1A2 Abrams tank as it maneuvered across the terrain, its massive form surprisingly graceful despite weighing over 70 tons. Standing atop a small rise overlooking the training field, retired Captain Thomas Armstrong watched the exercise with a critical eye. At 62, his 6-foot frame remained as straight and unyielding as it had been during his 30 years of military service. The lines etched deeply around his eyes spoke of both desert sun and countless difficult decisions. His silver hair, cropped in the same military style he had worn since his days at West Point, caught the morning light. Armstrong crossed his arms over his chest, the sleeve of his khaki button-up shirt pulling tight across muscles that had refused to surrender to age. The recruits called him Steel behind his back. Not because of his tank expertise, though that was legendary enough. The nickname came from his unflinching demeanor and the iron in his spine. He knew about the nickname and privately approved. Better to be respected than liked. A young lieutenant approached, his pace quickening as he neared Armstrong. "Sir, the first group is assembled in Hangar 3. Armstrong nodded without looking at the officer. His eyes remained fixed on the tank, watching its turret rotate as it acquired a target. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. The lieutenant hesitated. "Sir, Colonel Whitman specifically requested you start on time today. There's a VIP visit later and—" Armstrong finally turned, fixing the younger man with a steady gaze that had once stared down Iraqi tank commanders across the burning oil fields of Kuwait. The lieutenant's words faltered. "5 minutes, Lieutenant. Some things can't be rushed." Armstrong nodded toward the tank on the field. "That crew just made a critical error in their targeting sequence. I need to see if they correct it." The lieutenant departed quickly, and Armstrong returned his attention to the field. His mind, however, drifted to another time, another place. Kuwait, 91, Operation Desert Storm. Smoke filled the sky, turning day to an eerie twilight. The radio crackled with urgent reports as 3 Iraqi T-72 tanks emerged from the black clouds of burning oil wells. Armstrong, then a young captain, stood in the commander's cupola of his M1A1 Abrams, call sign Iron Liberty. "Gunner Heat T-72, 2 o'clock, 1,500 meters," Armstrong called, his voice level despite the adrenaline surging through his body. "Identified," responded his gunner, Sergeant Michael Harmon. "Fire and adjust." The tank rocked as the 120-meter main gun sent its deadly payload downrange. Through his thermal sight, Armstrong watched the round connect with the lead Iraqi tank. The enemy vehicle erupted in a violent explosion, its turret blown completely off the hull. "Target destroyed, sir." "Shift fire, second tank, right 50 meters." The crew worked with practiced efficiency. In less than 15 minutes, 3 Iraqi tanks lay burning on the desert floor. Not a single round had been fired in return. Armstrong's tank had performed flawlessly, its crew operating as a single organism with multiple limbs but one mind. That day had earned him the Silver Star and cemented his reputation as one of the finest tank commanders in the USOC Army. The memory faded as the present-day Abrams on the training field finally corrected its targeting procedure. Armstrong allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction before turning toward Hangar 3. Inside the cavernous structure, 20 recruits stood in formation. They straightened visibly as Armstrong entered, his presence immediately commanding the room despite his civilian attire. These were not raw recruits but officer candidates, nearly finished with their advanced training before taking command of their own tank platoons. Armstrong surveyed them silently for a moment. "Gentlemen, ladies, today we're going to discuss something they don't teach you in the technical manuals, something you won't find in any field guide or operations handbook." He paced slowly before them. "Fear." The word hung in the air. A few of the candidates exchanged glances. "Not the fear of dying, though that's real enough. I'm talking about the fear of making decisions with incomplete information. The fear of giving an order that might get your people killed." Armstrong stopped pacing and faced them directly. "In a tank, you're sealed inside a metal box with 3 other souls. You depend on instruments, limited visibility, and reports coming through your headset. Often conflicting reports, and you have seconds, not minutes, to decide. Hesitate, and you're dead. Rush, and you might kill friendlies." The room was utterly silent now. "Let me tell you about the Battle of 73 Easting," For the next hour, Armstrong walked them through one of the most famous tank battles in modern warfare, where American M1 Abrams tanks had utterly devastated a much larger Iraqi force. He described not just the tactics and the technology, but the human elements, the decisions, the moments of doubt followed by commitment, the price of hesitation. As he concluded, Armstrong noticed a staff sergeant hovering at the door. The man gestured urgently. Questions will have to wait. Technical training resumes at 1300 hours. As the candidates filed out, Armstrong approached the sergeant. What is it, Reese? Sir, there's a call for you in Colonel Whitman's office. They said it's urgent. Armstrong frowned. Few people would call him through official channels these days, especially with enough priority to pull him from a training session. Colonel Whitman's office was pristine, reflecting its occupant's meticulous nature. Whitman himself, a man 20 years Armstrong's junior with a reputation for being a stickler for protocol, stood as Armstrong entered. Captain Armstrong, thank you for coming quickly. I have General Cortez on the secure line for you. Armstrong's eyebrows raised slightly at the mention of his old friend and former commanding officer. William Cortez? Yes, sir. Now Director of Special Projects at the Pentagon. Whitman gestured to the phone on his desk, then discreetly stepped out, closing the door behind him. Armstrong picked up the receiver. Bill, it's Thomas. Steele, damn good to hear your voice. The familiar gravelly tone of William Iron Bill Cortez came through clearly. At 65, Cortez was one of the few men who outranked Armstrong in both military hierarchy and age. How's life treating you down in the Dust Bowl? Can't complain. These new recruits keep me busy enough. What's with the cloak and dagger routine calling me through official channels? There was a pause on the line. When Cortez spoke again, his tone had shifted. Thomas, something's come up. Something connected to your family history. Armstrong's grip tightened on the receiver. My family? Your grandfather, John Armstrong. A cold sensation spread through Armstrong's chest. His grandfather had been a tank commander in World War II, part of the 2nd Armored Division that fought across France after D-Day. But he had passed away when Thomas was still a teenager, taking most of his war stories with him. What about him? His tank has been found. Armstrong sank slowly into Colonel Whitman's chair, his legs suddenly unsteady. That's not possible. The Sherman was destroyed in Germany, 1944. Apparently not. A Border Patrol agent in southern Texas spotted it on a property just across the Mexican border. It was being prepared for transport, likely to be scrapped for metal. Armstrong's mind raced. His grandfather had commanded an M4 Sherman tank nicknamed Resilient during the push through France. The family story was that it had been destroyed in combat near the German border. Are you sure it's the same tank? Serial numbers match Department of Army records. And there's something else. The tank has the name Resilient still visible on the barrel. Armstrong closed his eyes briefly, memories of his grandfather flooding back. The old man had rarely spoken about the war, but when he did, it was always with a distant look in his eyes, as if seeing things no one else could. Thomas, I need you in Washington. Tomorrow, tomorrow if possible. What exactly is going on here, Bill? Another pause. I'd rather not discuss it over the phone, but this isn't just about preserving a piece of history. There's more to it, much more. 2 hours later, Armstrong was in his modest ranch house on the outskirts of Killeen, packing a small duffel bag. His movements were precise and efficient, the habits of a military lifetime impossible to break. The house was Spartanly furnished but spotlessly clean. On the mantel above a fireplace that rarely saw use in the Texas heat, a collection of framed photographs chronicled a life of service. Armstrong in desert fatigues beside his tank in Kuwait. Armstrong receiving his Silver Star. Armstrong with his late wife, Catherine, before cancer took her 10 years ago. And an old sepia-toned photo of a young man in World War II uniform standing proudly beside a Sherman tank. John Thunderbolt Armstrong, his grandfather. Thomas paused before this last photo, studying the faded image. What secrets had the old man kept? What had really happened to his tank and crew? His ringing cell phone interrupted his thoughts. The caller ID showed a name that sent a jolt through him. Emma Armstrong, his daughter. Their relationship had fractured after Catherine's death. Emma had wanted him to retire from the Army, to be present during her mother's final months. But Thomas had been commanding a tank company in Iraq, and by the time he secured compassionate leave, Catherine was already gone. Emma had never fully forgiven him for his absence. Now 32 and an Army intelligence officer herself, Emma rarely called unless it was absolutely necessary. Armstrong answered, his voice carefully neutral. Emma. Dad. Her tone was equally measured. I just got orders to report to the Pentagon for a special assignment, something about a historical recovery project. Armstrong's grip tightened on the phone. Let me guess, it involves a Sherman tank. The silence on the other end confirmed his suspicion. You're on this too? Emma finally asked. Of course, it's Grandpa John's tank. I just found out myself. I'm flying to D.C. tomorrow morning. Same, United Flight 1422. An awkward silence stretched between them. I suppose I'll see you at the gate, Armstrong said finally. I suppose you will. After she hung up, Armstrong stood motionless in the center of his living room. His ordered world had suddenly tilted on its axis. First the tank, now Emma, both elements of his past unexpectedly colliding with his present. He moved to a small home office and unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. From it, he retrieved a worn leather journal, his grandfather's war diary, passed down to him after the old man's death. Armstrong had read it once, long ago, finding mostly day-to-day accounts of Army life, but little about combat operations, which were often heavily censored in such personal accounts. He flipped through the yellowed pages, scanning entries from 1944, looking for any mention of the tank's fate. Most entries were mundane, details about rations and weather, occasional comments about letters from home. Then a passage caught his eye. August 14th, Sonior crossed into eastern France today. Heavy German resistance. Resilient, performing well despite fuel issues. The boys are in good spirits. Johnson keeps talking about his girl back in Nebraska. Says he's going to marry her the minute he gets home. Reynolds got a Dear John letter yesterday, taking it hard. Doc keeping an eye on him. August 20th, 1944. Advancing steadily. German forces retreating but leaving scorched earth. Booby traps everywhere. Lost Baker Company's lead tank this morning towed a hidden 88. No survivors. Command says push forward regardless. Something big happening soon. Rumors of a special operation. The entries continued in this vein until August 27th, then abruptly stopped. The next entry was dated September 18th, nearly 3 weeks later. September 18th, 1944. Hospital in England. Doctors say I'm lucky to be alive. Don't feel lucky. Can't stop thinking about the boys. Reynolds, Johnson, Miller, especially Doc. Keep seeing their faces, keep hearing the sounds. Some things can't be written, even here. Some things shouldn't be remembered, but can't be forgotten. The remaining pages were blank. Armstrong closed the journal slowly. His grandfather had never spoken about those missing 3 weeks. Whatever had happened during that time had been buried deep, until now. The flight to D.C. the next morning was uneventful. Armstrong found Emma already at the gate when he arrived, her slim figure immediately recognizable despite the civilian clothes. She had her mother's features, high cheekbones and intelligent green eyes, but Armstrong's stubborn jawline. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. They exchanged stiff greetings, both falling back on military formality to navigate the emotional minefield between them. "You've been well?" Armstrong asked as they settled into adjacent seats on the aircraft. "Well enough. Made major last month." "Congratulations. Your mother would be proud." Emma tensed slightly at the mention of Catherine, but nodded. "What do you know about this project?" "Almost nothing. Just that they found Grandpa John's tank. Seems like a lot of high-level interest for an old Sherman. My orders were signed by General Matthews himself." Armstrong raised an eyebrow. Matthews was the Army Chief of Staff. Whatever this was, it went beyond simple historical preservation. "Your grandfather never told you what happened to his tank crew?" Armstrong shook his head. "He rarely talked about the war. All I knew was that his tank was supposedly destroyed in action near the German border, and he was the only survivor. But now the tank turns up in Mexico 80 years later, apparently." Emma pulled out her tablet and began reviewing documents. Armstrong recognized her retreat into work as a defensive mechanism, one he had often employed himself. Like father, like daughter, whether she wanted to admit it or not. He closed his eyes, feigning sleep, but actually thinking about his grandfather. John Armstrong had been a quiet, steady presence in his childhood, teaching him to fish and hunt, instilling in him a respect for discipline and responsibility. But there had always been a sadness about the old man, a distant look that would come over him at unexpected moments. Now Thomas wondered what ghosts had haunted his grandfather all those years. The Pentagon was a city unto itself, a massive structure housing thousands of military and civilian personnel. Armstrong and Emma were met at the entrance by a young lieutenant who escorted them through the labyrinthine corridors to a secure conference room deep within the building. Inside, William Cortez waited, his broad frame still impressive despite his age. His silver hair was cropped close, and his dress uniform bore the 3 stars of a lieutenant general. He greeted Armstrong with a firm handshake and a genuine smile. "Steele, been too long. Bill, or should I call you General now?" Cortez waved this away. "Still just Bill to you." He turned to Emma. "Major Armstrong, thank you for joining us on such short notice." "Sir, please, both of you, have a seat. We have a lot to cover." The room contained a large table with several chairs, a projector screen on one wall, and various secure communication equipment. As they sat, Cortez activated the room's privacy protocols, and the glass walls turned opaque. "What I'm about to share is classified, though much of it is historical at this point." Cortez activated the projector and an image appeared on the screen. A Sherman tank, mud-caked and battle-worn, sitting in what appeared to be a large warehouse. On its long barrel, faded but still legible, was the name Resilient. This photo was taken 3 days ago at a secure facility near Laredo. Border Patrol spotted the tank during a drone surveillance operation of suspected smuggling routes. It was on a property belonging to a Mexican national named Carlos Vega, who apparently deals in World War II memorabilia and militaria. Armstrong studied the image intently. Despite 80 years of wear and tear, the tank was remarkably intact. "We identified it through serial numbers and confirmed it matches Army records for the M4A3 Sherman assigned to then Lieutenant John Armstrong in August 1944. Emma leaned forward. "With respect, sir, why is the Pentagon interested in an 80-year-old tank? Shouldn't this be a matter for the Army Historical Division or the Smithsonian?" Cortez nodded at the question. "Normally, yes, but this case has complications." He changed the slide to show a close-up of the tank's interior. "When our team examined the tank, they found evidence that the armor had been modified. Specifically, there's an additional compartment welded into the hull, sealed shut for decades." Armstrong felt a chill. "What was inside?" "We haven't opened it yet. That's part of why you're both here." Cortez looked directly at Armstrong. "Thomas, your grandfather was involved in something codenamed Operation Blacksmith. Most of the files were classified until 10 years ago, and even now parts remain redacted." He changed slides again, showing a declassified document with numerous black lines obscuring text. "From what we can piece together, your grandfather's tank crew was sent on a special mission behind enemy lines in late August 1944. The official record states they were to rendezvous with French resistance fighters and gather intelligence on German defenses. The tank was reported destroyed on August 29th, with Lieutenant Armstrong, the sole survivor, recovered by advancing Allied forces on September 1st. Armstrong exchanged a glance with Emma. "But the tank wasn't destroyed," Emma stated the obvious. "No," Cortez agreed, "and that raises questions about everything else in the official record." Armstrong thought about his grandfather's journal, the missing weeks, the cryptic final entry. "You think he was involved in something more sensitive than reconnaissance?" "We do, and we think whatever that mission was, it has something to do with what's sealed inside that compartment." Armstrong leaned back in his chair, trying to process this information. His grandfather, the quiet man who taught him to fish, had carried secrets to his grave. Secret missions. A tank that was supposed to be destroyed, but wasn't. "Why bring us in?" Emma asked. "I understand my father's connection, but why me specifically?" Cortez looked uncomfortable for the first time. "2 reasons. First, Major, your expertise in military intelligence and historical analysis makes you uniquely qualified to help piece together what really happened. And the second reason?" Cortez looked from Emma to Armstrong. "John Armstrong is still alive." The statement hit Armstrong like a physical blow. "That's not possible. He died in 1978. I was at his funeral." "No, Thomas. The man buried in 1978 was someone else. Your grandfather was placed in a specialized care facility under an assumed name, part of a protective program for individuals with knowledge of highly sensitive operations." Armstrong stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's absurd. I knew my grandfather. I grew up with him." "The man you knew was indeed John Armstrong, but he didn't die when you were told he did." Cortez's tone was gentle but firm. "He was relocated in 1978 when certain foreign intelligence services began showing renewed interest in Operation Blacksmith participants." "Where is he now?" Emma asked, her voice carefully controlled while her father struggled with shock. "A veterans care facility in Maryland. He's 98 years old and suffering from advanced dementia. He has few lucid moments now." Cortez looked directly at Armstrong. But he might recognize you, Thomas. And he might be willing to tell you what he never told his handlers. What really happened during those 3 days and what's inside that compartment. Armstrong sank back into his chair, his mind reeling. His grandfather, alive all these years, the man who had shaped his childhood, inspired his military career, had been living less than 100 miles away for decades. Why tell us now, he finally asked. Why not take this secret to his grave? Cortez sighed heavily, because whatever is in that compartment might still be sensitive, even after 80 years. We need to know what we're dealing with before we open it. And because, he hesitated, because I believe John Armstrong deserves to have his real story told before he passes. He deserves recognition for whatever he and his crew actually did, not the cover story that's been in place all these years. Armstrong noticed something in Cortez's expression, a personal investment beyond professional duty. There's something else you're not telling us. Cortez nodded slowly. My father was a tanker in the 2nd Armored Division. He never spoke about the war either, but after he died, I found letters that mentioned your grandfather and the crew of the Resilient. I think our father's paths crossed during those missing days in August 1904. The revelation hung in the air, connecting them all through the invisible threads of history and family. We're bringing the tank to the Aberdeen Proving Grounds for secure examination, Cortez continued. I want you both there when we open that compartment, and I want you to speak with John Armstrong first, if he's able. Emma looked at her father, their earlier tension temporarily set aside in the face of this shared shock. When do we see him? Armstrong asked. This afternoon, I've arranged transportation. 2 hours later, Armstrong and Emma sat silently in the back of a government SUV as it traveled the highway toward the Rolling Hills Veterans Care Center in rural Maryland. Neither had spoken much since leaving the Pentagon, each lost in their own thoughts. Armstrong stared out of the window, watching the landscape flow past. His mind kept returning to memories of his grandfather, teaching him to shoot a rifle when he was 12, attending his high school graduation, the pride in the old man's eyes when Thomas was accepted to West Point. Had it all been an act, part of a cover identity? No, the emotions had been real. Armstrong was certain of that. Whatever secrets his grandfather had kept, John Armstrong's love for his family had been genuine. What do you remember about him? Emma's voice broke the silence. Armstrong turned to look at his daughter. It was the first personal question she had asked him in years. He was quiet, strong. He could fix anything mechanical. He's the one who first got me interested in tanks, you know. Had models of them all over his workshop. I wish I had known him. Emma had been born years after the funeral of the man they thought was John Armstrong. He would have loved you, Armstrong said softly. You have his determination. Emma glanced at him, surprised by the personal observation. Mom always said I got my stubbornness from you. Maybe, but I got mine from him. A ghost of a smile touched Emma's lips. The first Armstrong had seen directed at him in a very long time. The Rolling Hills facility was deceptively pleasant from the outside, resembling an upscale country club more than a nursing home. Cortez had explained that it was primarily for retired military and intelligence personnel, many of whom had worked on classified projects throughout their careers. They were met at the entrance by the facility's director, Dr. Elaine Carter, a composed woman in her 50s with a practiced, professional smile. Captain Armstrong, Major Armstrong, General Cortez briefed me on your visit. I must prepare you. Mr. Armstrong's condition is advanced. He has good days and bad days. Today has been challenging. Armstrong steeled himself, we understand. Dr. Carter led them through sunlit corridors to a private wing of the facility. The security was subtle but unmistakable to trained eyes. Cameras at every intersection. Staff with the alert posture of security personnel despite their medical uniforms. He's in our garden room at the moment. He often seems more comfortable there, surrounded by plants. Please don't be discouraged if he doesn't recognize you or becomes confused. It's the nature of the condition. She opened a door to reveal a bright solarium filled with tropical plants. Sitting in a wheelchair beside a large palm was a thin, frail man. His sparse white hair was neatly combed, and he wore a blue cardigan over a white shirt. His hands, once strong enough to maneuver the controls of a Sherman tank, now lay motionless in his lap. Armstrong stopped in the doorway, emotion overwhelming him. Despite the ravages of age and illness, he recognized the face. The strong jawline, now softened with age. The same blue eyes that had looked out from countless family photographs. Grandpa John, he whispered. The old man didn't look up. His gaze remained fixed on a point in the middle distance, seeing something beyond the room's walls. Armstrong approached slowly, Emma a step behind him. He knelt beside the wheelchair, entering his grandfather's field of vision. "Grandpa John, it's Thomas, your grandson." For a moment, there was nothing. Then slowly, the ancient eyes focused. Confusion, followed by a flash of recognition. "Tommy?" The voice was a thin echo of the robust baritone Armstrong remembered, but unmistakably his grandfather's. "Yes, sir, it's me." John Armstrong's gaze wandered, then fixed on Emma. Confusion returned to his expression. "Catherine? No, you're not Catherine." Emma glanced uncertainly at her father. "This is Emma, Grandpa, my daughter, your great-granddaughter." The old man seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. "Emma, pretty name." Dr. Carter had withdrawn discreetly, leaving them alone in the solarium. Armstrong pulled a chair close to his grandfather's wheelchair and sat. Emma remained standing, watching the reunion with mixed emotions. "Grandpa, I need to ask you about something. About your tank. About Resilient." The change was immediate and dramatic. John Armstrong's body tensed, and his eyes widened with sudden clarity. "The tank! They found it." Not a question, but a statement. Armstrong exchanged a surprised look with Emma. "Yes, they found it in Mexico." "Mexico," the old man repeated, then shook his head. "No, not right. Should be in France. We left it in France." "Left it?" "The records say it was destroyed." John Armstrong's eyes narrowed, a flash of his former sharpness breaking through the fog of dementia. "Records lie, we lied, had to, orders." Armstrong leaned closer. "What happened in those 3 days, Grandpa? August 27 to 30, 1904. The old man's breathing quickened, and his hands began to tremble. "Not supposed to talk about it. Never talk about it." "It's all right now. You can tell me. The war is long over." John Armstrong looked directly at his grandson, a moment of complete lucidity in his eyes. "The compartment. Did they open it?" Armstrong felt a chill. "Not yet." "Good. Good. Only open with the key, my key." "What key, Grandpa?" The old man's hand fumbled inside his cardigan, withdrawing a small, worn key on a tarnished chain around his neck. "This key. For locker 7. The papers are there, all the proof." Armstrong gently took the key. It was small, possibly for a safe deposit box or storage locker. "Proof of what, Grandpa?" But the moment of clarity was passing. John Armstrong's eyes were losing focus again, his mind retreating back behind the walls of dementia. "The boys. Have to get back to the boys. They're waiting, in the tank. 72 hours. We promised. 72 hours. Who, Grandpa? Who's waiting?" "Doc, Reynolds, Johnson, Miller, Trapped, behind the lines. 72 hours. Armstrong recognized the names from the journal entries. His grandfather's crew. "What happened to them, Grandpa?" But John Armstrong was fading, his momentary connection to the present slipping away. "Tired now. So tired." His head drooped, chin touching his chest. For a moment, Armstrong thought he had fallen asleep, but then the old man looked up again. His expression completely changed. No recognition, only polite confusion at the strangers before him. "Hello, are you the new doctors?" Armstrong felt Emma's hand on his shoulder, a silent signal that the moment was gone. He stood slowly, emotions churning inside him. "Thank you for your time, sir," he said formally, not wanting to confuse his grandfather further with claims of family connection he could no longer process. As they left the solarium, Armstrong clutched the small key tightly in his hand, a physical link to whatever secret his grandfather had carried for 80 years. Dr. Carter was waiting in the hallway, her expression sympathetic. "I hope you were able to have some meaningful interaction. The lucid moments are increasingly rare." Armstrong nodded, unable to trust his voice immediately. "Did he ever mention a locker 7? Emma asked. "Not that I'm aware of," Dr. Carter replied. "But many of our residents keep personal items in our secure storage facility. I can check if he has anything there." A search of the facility's records revealed that John Armstrong did indeed have a small security box, number 7, in their storage room. With proper identification and the key, Armstrong was permitted access. The box contained a single sealed envelope, yellowed with age, marked classified in faded red ink. Armstrong, with his own security clearances, was allowed to sign for it. Back in the SUV, Emma examined the envelope without opening it. "It's been officially sealed by Army intelligence. Opening it without proper authorization would technically be a security violation." Armstrong took the envelope from her. "My grandfather just gave us the key and specifically told us to open it. I'd say that's authorization." Before Emma could protest, he broke the seal and carefully extracted the contents. Inside was a handwritten letter dated September 15th, 1944, and several photographs. The letter was in his grandfather's distinctive handwriting. To whom it may concern, if you are reading this, then the truth can finally be told. The official record states that on August 27th, 19 the M4A3 Sherman tank, resilient under my command, was destroyed by enemy action near the French-German border, with myself as the sole survivor. This is false. The truth is that my crew and I voluntarily remained behind enemy lines for 72 hours to complete a mission so secret that even now I am not permitted to fully disclose its nature. What I can say is this: during those 3 days, we recovered intelligence material of such significance that it altered the course of the war. The names of my crew have been stricken from official records listed as KIA. They are Sergeant Michael Doc Harmon, Gunner Sapple, James Reynolds, Loader Private William Johnson, Driver Private Henry Miller, Assistant Driver Radio. These men did not die in combat as reported. They survived our mission and returned to Allied lines with me on August 30th, 1944. Subsequently, they were reassigned under new identities to protect them from enemy intelligence services who would have gone to great lengths to determine what we had discovered. The material we recovered is sealed in a compartment welded into the hull of our tank, which was transported to a secure location after our return. I do not know where the tank is now. I write this account to ensure that someday, when secrecy is no longer necessary, my men can receive the recognition they deserve for their extraordinary courage. Lieutenant John T. Armstrong, 2nd Armored Division, in U.S. Army. Armstrong finished reading aloud, his voice thick with emotion. Emma stared at him, then at the letter. "So they all survived," she said softly. "But what did they find that was so important?" Armstrong examined the photographs that had accompanied the letter. They showed 5 men standing beside the Sherman tank resilient. In the center was a young John Armstrong, his resemblance to Thomas unmistakable despite the 80-year gap. Beside him were 4 other soldiers, all appearing exhausted but standing proudly. Armstrong turned the photograph over. On the back, in the same handwriting as the letter, were names: Lieutenant John Armstrong, Sergeant Michael Harmon, Ciplo James Reynolds, Private William Johnson, Private Henry Miller. The resilient crew, not killed in action as the official record stated, but alive in this photograph taken after their return. "We need to talk to Cortez," Armstrong said, carefully replacing the items in the envelope. As if summoned by his word, Armstrong's phone rang. It was Cortez. "Thomas, where are you now?" "Just leaving the care facility. We found something. A letter from my grandfather explaining that his crew wasn't killed as reported. They all survived whatever mission they were on." There was a pause on the line. "Did he mention what they found? What's in the compartment?" "No, just that it was intelligence material that altered the course of the war." His words. Another pause. "I need you both at Aberdeen immediately. The tank arrived an hour ago, and our technical team is assessing it now. And Thomas, there's something else you should know." Armstrong tensed at Cortez's tone. "What is it?" "We received word that a European collector named Klaus Schmidt is making inquiries about the tank. He's offering substantial sums for information on its whereabouts." "Who is he?" "Officially, a wealthy industrialist and military historian from Switzerland. Unofficially, we have intelligence suggesting he's connected to neo-Nazi groups interested in recovering lost World War II artifacts and documents." Armstrong's grip tightened on the phone. How would he even know about the tank being found? "That's what concerns us. Someone leaked information. We're investigating, but until we know more, we're accelerating the examination. I want that compartment open today, with you present." The call ended, and Armstrong relayed the information to Emma, who had been listening intently. "Neo-Nazis?" she repeated incredulously. "After all this time, what could possibly be in that tank that would interest them?" Armstrong shook his head. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think this goes well beyond a simple historical recovery." The SUV changed course, heading now for Aberdeen Proving Grounds. As they drove, Armstrong stared at the photograph of his grandfather and his crew, trying to read in their expressions some hint of what they had experienced, what secret they had carried all these years. 72 hours behind enemy lines. Whatever had happened during those 3 days had been significant enough to alter 5 men's identities and keep a tank hidden for 80 years. And now, after all this time, that secret was about to be revealed. Aberdeen Proving Grounds, established in 1917, had long served as the Army's primary facility for testing new weapons and equipment. Its sprawling acreage housed firing ranges, test tracks, and numerous specialized facilities. Within a high-security compound in the center of the base stood a large examination building where the most sensitive equipment analysis took place. It was here that the tank Resilient now rested, surrounded by a team of military technicians, historians, and security personnel. Armstrong and Emma arrived as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the compound. Cortez met them at the security checkpoint, his expression grave. "Glad you made it? We're ready to begin." He led them through multiple security doors into the main examination room. The M4A3 Sherman tank dominated the space, its olive drab paint faded and chipped, revealing patches of rust beneath. Despite its age, the tank retained an imposing presence, a ghost from a war long past but not forgotten. Armstrong approached it slowly, laying a hand on its cold metal flank. This was the machine his grandfather had commanded, had lived in during some of the most intense fighting of World War II. The connection to his family's Peshvat was almost overwhelming. "Where exactly is this compartment?" he asked, circling the tank. A civilian technician in a lab coat approached. "Right here, sir." He indicated a section of the hull on the left side near the rear. "It's not part of the original design. Someone cut into the armor plating and welded in an additional box, then refinished it to match the surrounding area. Quite skillfully done, actually. You wouldn't notice unless you knew exactly what to look for." Armstrong examined the section. Sure enough, there were subtle weld marks visible under the paint. "How do we open it?" "That's the thing," the technician replied. "There's no obvious access panel or door. We were considering cutting through, but General Cortez wanted to wait for you." Armstrong remembered his grandfather's words. The key. But the small key he'd been given seemed far too small for any tank component. "Let me examine it more closely." He climbed onto the tank, running his fingers along the welded section, feeling for any irregularity. Nothing. He moved methodically, covering every inch of the modified area. Emma joined him, her trained intelligence officer's eye scrutinizing the tank. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to what appeared to be a small imperfection in the paint near the bottom of the compartment. "That looks like it could be a keyhole, filled in with putty and painted over." Armstrong knelt to examine the spot. Indeed, there was a subtle depression that might conceivably be a filled-in keyhole. He took out a small pocket knife and carefully scraped at the area. After a moment, the putty gave way, revealing a small, recessed keyhole. He withdrew his grandfather's key from his pocket. It was a perfect match for the size and shape. "Stand back," Cortez ordered the technicians. "Captain Armstrong, proceed when ready." Armstrong inserted the key. It slid in smoothly as if the lock had been recently oiled despite 80 years of disuse. He turned it, feeling resistance at first, then a satisfying click as the mechanism engaged. A seam appeared in the metal as a small door, previously invisible, released from its sealed position. Armstrong carefully pulled it open. Inside the compartment was a metal document case, roughly the size of a modern laptop computer, but thicker. It bore no markings except for a small serial number stamped into the metal. With gloved hands, a technician carefully removed the case and placed it on a nearby examination table, equipped with specialized lighting and recording equipment. "Shall we?" Cortez asked, looking to Armstrong. Armstrong nodded, his throat tight with anticipation. The technician examined the case for booby traps or other security measures, then carefully released the latches. The lid opened with a soft hiss, as if the case had been vacuum sealed. Inside, protected by a transparent envelope, was a collection of papers, photographs, and what appeared to be technical drawings. On top was a handwritten note in German, with an English translation attached by a paperclip. Cortez read the translation aloud. "To whomever recovers these documents, what you now possess is evidence of crimes against humanity and scientific research conducted without moral constraint. The undersigned, members of the German scientific community working under duress, entrust these materials to Allied forces in the hope that such atrocities will never again be committed in the name of scientific advancement. We beg forgiveness for our participation, however unwilling, in these projects." The note was signed by 7 German names with academic and professional credentials listed after each. Beneath this note lay detailed technical drawings of what appeared to be advanced rocket designs, experimental aircraft configurations, and most disturbingly, medical research documents with photographs of human subjects. "My God," Emma whispered, examining the documents. "These are V-2 rocket designs, but more advanced than anything we know they actually built. And these aircraft sketches, Their jet propulsion systems, years ahead of anything that existed in 1940. A historian from the Army Heritage Center, who had been called in to assist with the examination, studied the medical documents with growing horror. These are records from human experimentation, tests conducted on concentration camp prisoners to determine human tolerances to extreme conditions. High altitude, freezing temperatures, prolonged submersion. He looked up, his face pale. This is evidence of war crimes on an industrial scale. Armstrong thought of his grandfather and his crew, discovering these materials behind enemy lines. The moral weight of carrying such knowledge must have been crushing. There's something else, the technician said, lifting the layer of documents to reveal a small metal object nestled in foam at the bottom of the case. It was cylindrical, approximately 6 inches long and 2 inches in diameter, with intricate markings etched into its surface. "What is that?" Armstrong asked. The technician examined it carefully without removing it from the case. "I'm not sure. It's not like any WWII era device I'm familiar with. The markings appear to be mathematical formulas." Emma leaned closer. "Those aren't just any formulas. That's advanced physics, nuclear physics." The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly as the implications became clear. "Are you saying this is related to atomic research?" Cortez asked. "It could be," Emma replied. "Germany had its own nuclear program during the war, though it never progressed as far as the Manhattan Project." "Or so we thought," Armstrong said quietly. The historian carefully photographed each document as it was removed from the case, creating a digital record of the contents. As the examination continued, a picture began to emerge. The German scientists whose note accompanied the materials had been working on multiple advanced weapons projects, including rockets, jet aircraft, and potentially nuclear technology. Their research had involved horrific human experimentation and had progressed further than Allied intelligence had realized during the war. "This would have been explosive information in 1944, Cortez said. "It would have accelerated our understanding of German scientific capabilities and potentially altered our strategic priorities in the final months of the war. And it explains why my grandfather and his crew were given new identities," Armstrong added. "If German intelligence had learned that this material had been captured, they would have moved heaven and earth to recover it or eliminate those who had seen it." Emma was studying the translation of the German scientist's note more carefully. "There's something else here. They mention a Facility 47 near the French-German border. According to this, it was an underground research complex where these projects were coordinated." Armstrong remembered his grandfather's words at the care facility. "We left it in France. The tank had been abandoned near this secret facility after completing their mission." "So how did it end up in Mexico 80 years later?" Emma voiced the question they were all thinking. Cortez's phone rang. He answered, listened briefly, then ended the call with a troubled expression. "That was security. There's been an incident at the main gate. A civilian vehicle attempted to force entry. The occupants fled when challenged but abandoned their vehicle. Inside, security found surveillance equipment and military-grade communications gear." Armstrong and Emma exchanged alarmed looks. "Someone was monitoring the base," Emma said. "Schmidt," Armstrong guessed. "The collector you mentioned." Cortez nodded grimly. "It seems our European friend is more determined than we thought. I'm ordering increased security around the perimeter and moving the tank and these materials to a more secure location tonight." He turned to Armstrong. "Thomas, I think you should reconsider your retirement status. We need someone with your clearance level and personal connection to oversee this project. These materials need to be properly analyzed, and the full story of your grandfather's mission documented for historical records." Armstrong looked at the tank, then at the evidence of his grandfather's secret mission spread across the examination table. For 80 years, John Armstrong and his crew had carried this burden in silence, their actions unrecognized, their courage unacknowledged. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "For my grandfather, for his crew, they deserve to have their story told." Emma stepped forward. "I'm in too. My division can provide intelligence support, especially regarding any current threats from extremist groups interested in Nazi scientific research." Cortez nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll set up a secure project office here at Aberdeen. Code name," he thought for a moment, "Operation Resilient." As night fell over Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Armstrong stood alone beside the Sherman tank. The technical team had departed to secure the discovered materials, and security personnel maintained a discreet perimeter around the building. He placed his hand on the tank's cold metal flank once more, feeling a connection to his grandfather stronger than ever before. What courage it must have taken to volunteer for such a mission. What moral fortitude to carry such secrets for a lifetime. The sound of footsteps broke his reverie. Emma approached, her expression softened from the professional mask she typically wore around him. "I called the care facility," she said. "Grandpa John is resting comfortably. They said he's been calmer since our visit." Armstrong nodded. "Good, that's good." A moment of awkward silence stretched between them. Then Emma spoke again. "I was wrong, after Mom died. I blamed you for not being there, but you were doing what you had to do, what you were trained to do." Armstrong looked at his daughter, surprised by this unexpected opening. "I should have tried harder to get back," he admitted. "No mission is more important than family. That's something I learned too late." "Maybe we both did." Emma gestured at the tank. "But now we have a chance to work together, to honor Grandpa John and make this right." Armstrong nodded, a weight lifting from his heart. "Your mother would be proud of you, Emma, the woman you've become." Emma's eyes glistened in the dim light of the examination room. "She'd be proud of both of us, I think, for finding our way back to each other." As they stood together beside the silent sentinel of their family's past, Armstrong felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since leaving active duty. His grandfather's mission, begun 80 years ago, was not yet complete. Now it fell to him to finish it. And somewhere, in a care facility, in Maryland, an old soldier who had carried the weight of history on his shoulders for a lifetime could perhaps finally rest, knowing his secret was in good hands. The 72-hour ordeal of the crew of Resilient had ended in 1944, but its repercussions were only now beginning to unfold. Dawn broke over Laredo, Texas, the rising sun casting long shadows across the dusty landscape. Thomas Armstrong stood at the chain-link fence separating American soil from Mexico, his weathered face impassive as he surveyed the terrain beyond. To his right stood Emma, her military posture mirroring his own despite the civilian clothes they both wore. Behind them waited a small convoy of unmarked vehicles, engines idling softly in the early morning heat. "There it is," Emma said, handing her father a pair of binoculars. Through the lenses, Armstrong focused on a compound about half a mile inside Mexican territory. The property was surrounded by a high wall topped with security cameras, an unusual level of protection for what was ostensibly a private collection of military memorabilia. In the center courtyard, visible through the main gate, sat several vintage military vehicles partially covered by tarps. "Our contact confirms the Sherman was moved from this location 3 days ago," Emma continued. "But Carlos Vega should still be on site. He might know where it went before Border Patrol intercepted it." Armstrong lowered his binoculars. "And our authorization?" "Limited. We can cross with Mexican federal police escort, question Vega, but nothing more. State Department doesn't want an incident." A black SUV approached from the Mexican side, dust billowing behind it. 2 uniformed officers from the Federales emerged, their expressions professional but guarded. "Captain Armstrong? Major Armstrong?" The older officer approached with a crisp nod. "Comandante Ruiz, I understand you wish to speak with Senor Vega regarding a stolen military artifact." "That's right," Armstrong replied. "We believe he was in possession of a World War II tank that rightfully belongs to the U.S. government." Ruiz's expression revealed nothing. "Senor Vega has agreed to speak with you as a courtesy. He maintains he purchased the vehicle legally from a private collector in Europe." "We'll see," Armstrong said. 30 minutes later, they were seated in the surprisingly elegant study of Carlos Vega's hacienda. Vega himself was not what Armstrong had expected. Rather than the rough smuggler he had imagined, Vega was a cultured man in his 60s, dressed in an immaculate linen suit, with the air of a retired academic. "Captain Armstrong," Vega began, his English perfect with only the slightest accent, "I understand you have questions about the Sherman tank that was recently in my possession." "That tank belonged to my grandfather," Armstrong stated flatly. "It was reported destroyed in France in 1944. I want to know how it ended up here." Vega raised an eyebrow. "Your grandfather? How fascinating." He moved to a cabinet and withdrew a leather-bound folder. "I acquired the tank 6 months ago from a collector in Switzerland named Klaus Schmidt. These are the provenance documents." Emma accepted the folder and began examining the contents, her eyes narrowing as she read. "According to these papers, the tank was recovered from a farm in eastern France in 1973, purchased by a private collector named Heinrich Müller, then sold to Schmidt in 1998. "That's correct," Vega confirmed. "I specialize in military vehicles with unique histories. When Schmidt offered to sell me an authentic Sherman with confirmed combat history, I was naturally interested." Did Schmidt mention anything unusual about this particular tank? Armstrong asked. Something flickered in Vega's eyes. Caution. Recognition. He mentioned only that it had been abandoned behind German lines and later recovered. Its history after the war was what intrigued me, how machinery of war becomes artifact, then collector's item. Emma closed the folder. And why were you moving it just as U.S. authorities became aware of its existence? Vega smiled thinly. I received a better offer. From Schmidt, ironically, he seemed to have developed seller's remorse. He offered to buy it back, Armstrong pressed. At twice what I paid originally. Business is business, Captain. Armstrong studied the man carefully. Vega knew more than he was saying, but pushing harder with Mexican authorities present would likely yield nothing. The tank is now in U.S. custody, Armstrong said. If you have any further information about its history or why Schmidt was so interested in reacquiring it, I suggest you share it now. Vega spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. I've told you everything I know. The tank changed hands several times over decades. Whatever secrets it might hold are unknown to me. As they prepared to leave, Vega approached Armstrong privately, speaking softly so the Mexican officers couldn't overhear. Captain, a word of advice. Be careful with Schmidt. He is not merely a collector. He seeks items with specific histories. Items connected to certain aspects of the Reich that many would prefer remain buried. Before Armstrong could respond, Vega turned away, the conversation clearly over. Back across the border, Armstrong and Emma debriefed with the team Cortez had assembled. In a secure room at a Border Patrol facility, they reviewed what they had learned. Schmidt is the key, Emma said, displaying the provenance documents on a digital screen. These papers trace a convincing history, but there are inconsistencies. The farm where the tank was supposedly found doesn't exist on any map of the region. And this collector, Heinrich Müller, the name is essentially the German equivalent of John Smith, almost certainly an alias. Armstrong nodded, examining photos of the tank taken before its transport to Aberdeen. The question is why? Why create an elaborate cover story for a vintage tank? What makes resilience so valuable after all these years? A young intelligence analyst raised his hand. Sir, we've been researching Klaus Schmidt. On the surface, he's a wealthy industrialist with a passion for military history. Dig deeper, and there are concerning connections. His grandfather was an SS officer assigned to a research facility near the French-German border. And Schmidt himself has been photographed at gatherings of neo-Nazi groups across Europe. Armstrong thought of his grandfather, now sleeping in a care facility in Maryland, unaware that the secret he had guarded for 80 years was finally emerging. Whatever my grandfather and his crew found in 1944 still matters to someone, he said grimly, and I intend to find out why. 3 days later, Armstrong stood in a massive aircraft hangar at Fort Hood, Texas. Before him, surrounded by restoration equipment and diagnostic tools, sat the Sherman tank Resilient. After its initial examination at Aberdeen, Cortez had authorized its transfer to the Army's primary tank facility, where specialists could properly assess and restore it. The mysterious compartment had been carefully removed intact and remained under guard at a secure facility. Armstrong's focus now was on the tank itself, searching for any additional clues his grandfather might have left behind. Emma entered the hangar, accompanied by a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s. Despite civilian clothes, the man's military bearing was unmistakable. Dad, this is Sergeant Major Michael Harmon, Jr., Emma said, son of Michael Doc Harmon. Armstrong turned sharply. Doc Harmon's son? The man stepped forward, extending a weathered hand. Captain Armstrong, I understand my father served with your grandfather. Armstrong shook the offered hand, studying the man's face. There was a clear resemblance to the young soldier in the photograph his grandfather had kept. Your father was my grandfather's gunner. The official record listed him as killed in action in 1944. Harmon nodded solemnly. That's the story I grew up with, too, that he died in Korea in 1951. It wasn't until his actual death in 1996 that I learned the truth, that his identity had been changed after some classified mission in World War II. Armstrong glanced at Emma, who explained, I've been tracking down the families of all 5 crew members. Sergeant Major Harmon is the only direct descendant I've located so far who was told anything about their real history. My father didn't share much, Harmon continued, but in his final days he told me about the tank, about the mission behind German lines. He made me promise to keep the secret until someone came asking specifically about Resilient. And did he mention what they found? Armstrong asked. What was in that sealed compartment? Only that it was something that would have changed the course of the war if the Germans had been able to use it, something they called the Bell Project. Armstrong exchanged a meaningful look with Emma. The Bell Project? Did he elaborate? Harmon shook his head. He was heavily medicated by then, but he did give me this. From his pocket, he withdrew a small notebook bound in faded leather. His personal journal from August 1944. He kept it hidden all those years. Armstrong accepted the journal reverently. This could fill in the gaps in my grandfather's account. There's something else, Harmon said. My father mentioned a man named Richard Cortez. Said if trouble ever came from the old mission, Cortez could be trusted. Richard Cortez, Armstrong repeated. General William Cortez's father. Emma nodded. The connection Cortez mentioned. His father knew the Resilient crew. I'd like to stay and help, Harmon said, gesturing to the Sherman. I was a master mechanic in the Army. Worked on Abrams tanks for 20 years. But I know a thing or two about these old machines as well. Armstrong smiled for the first time in days. We could use your expertise, Sergeant Major. Over the next several days, Armstrong, Emma, and Harmon worked with the restoration team, carefully examining every inch of the Sherman tank. Harmon's knowledge proved invaluable as they systematically checked each component, looking for any additional hidden compartments or modifications. Armstrong spent evenings reading Doc Harmon's journal, which provided a day-by-day account of the crew's experiences in August 1904. The entries were sometimes cryptic, clearly written to avoid revealing classified information should the journal fall into the wrong hands. But they painted a vivid picture of the crew's journey. August 26, 1944. Orders came directly from Schaeff today. Lieutenant Armstrong gathered us privately, said we're being detached for special duty. Very hush-hush, something about a high-value intelligence target behind the lines. We're to rendezvous with French resistance fighters near Metz. Johnson's nervous, keeps checking the engine. Reynolds is cleaning his sidearm for the third time today. Miller jokes as always, but I can see he's tense too. Only the LT seems calm. Whatever we're heading into, I'm glad he's in command. August 27, 1944. Crossed into German-held territory at 0300. No resistance at the border, but plenty of signs of German retreat. Burned out vehicles, abandoned equipment. Resilient is running well despite fuel issues. We're maintaining radio silence as ordered. The LT has sealed orders that he checks periodically but shares nothing. French guides expected to meet us by nightfall. August 28, 1944. Met with resistance cell led by a woman called Nightingale. She brought a German scientist, a Dr. Keller, who had defected. Terrified man kept looking over his shoulder. Spoke of a research facility in a mine complex 20 kilometers east. Called it Facility 47. Something there has him spooked badly. We move at dawn. The journal continued with details of their approach to the facility, the precautions they took to avoid German patrols, and finally their infiltration of the supposedly abandoned mine that housed the secret research complex. August 29, 1944. God help us. What we found inside defies description. The facility was partially evacuated, but documents and equipment remained. Dr. Keller led us to a secured area deep in the complex. Inside was machinery unlike anything I've seen. A device they called Die Glock, the bell. Keller says it's part of a weapons program, something to do with advanced physics. There were other documents too. Medical files, photos that will haunt me forever, human subjects, experiments. The LT ordered us to gather everything we could carry. Keller selected specific items, said they were the most critical, evidence of both the weapons research and the atrocities. We loaded them into a special compartment Reynolds and Miller welded into Resilient's hull yesterday. August 30th, 1944. Disaster. German patrol spotted us 5 kilometers from the facility. Heavy firefight. Keller was hit, died instantly. Nightingale led the remaining resistance fighters in a diversionary action, allowing us to escape with the materials. Johnson took shrapnel in the arm but insists he can still drive. We're heading west now, trying to reach Allied lines. The LT says what we're carrying could change the course of the war. Worth any risk. The final entry described their return to Allied territory, their immediate debriefing by high-ranking intelligence officers, and the beginnings of the cover story that would become the official record. August 31st, 1944. They're separating us tomorrow. New identities, new assignments. The official story is that Resilient was destroyed and I was killed along with Reynolds, Johnson, and Miller. Only the LT supposedly survived. We've all been sworn to secrecy for the duration of the war and a period of not less than 30 years thereafter. I asked what would happen to the tank and the materials we recovered. The colonel just said, "That's no longer your concern, Sergeant. I may never see these men again, the finest I've ever served with. Whatever the future holds, I'm proud of what we did these past 5 days." Armstrong closed the journal, a complex mix of emotions washing over him. Pride in his grandfather's courage, awe at the magnitude of their mission, and a growing unease about what exactly Die Glocke might have been. He found Emma in the restoration area, examining the tank's turret with Harmon. "I think I know what they found," Armstrong said without preamble. "Something the Germans called die Glocke, the bell." Emma's eyes widened. The bell? That was a rumored Nazi wonder weapon. Most historians consider it a myth, like their supposed flying saucers. Myth or not, it's what they found, along with documentation of experiments on human subjects. Armstrong handed her the journal and read the entry for August 29th. As Emma read, her expression grew increasingly troubled. "This matches what we found in the compartment. The technical drawings, the medical files, but the bell itself wasn't in the compartment," Armstrong finished. "Just documentation about it. So where is it now?" Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a military courier who handed Emma a sealed envelope. She opened it, quickly scanning the contents. "It's from NSA cryptographic analysis," she explained. "They've been working on the formulas etched into that metal cylinder we found. It's not just nuclear physics, it's something they're calling torsion physics. Theoretical work decades ahead of anything that should have existed in the 1940s. "Meaning what exactly?" Armstrong asked. "Meaning the Nazis were researching something beyond atomic weapons, something potentially more destructive, or," she hesitated, "something designed to manipulate time and space itself." Harmon, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "My father never elaborated on what they found, but he had nightmares until the day he died. Would wake up screaming about a blue light and people turning inside out." The three stood in troubled silence, the implications hanging heavy in the air. Whatever the Bell Project had been, it had terrified those who encountered it. Armstrong's phone rang, breaking the tension. It was Cortez. "Thomas, we have a situation. There was a break-in at the Maryland Care Facility last night. 2 armed men attempted to access your grandfather's room." Armstrong felt his blood run cold. "Is he all right?" "He's unharmed. Security personnel intervened before they reached him. One intruder was killed, the other escaped." "Schmidt," Armstrong said with certainty. "That's our assessment. The deceased man was a known associate of European neo-Nazi groups. We're moving your grandfather to a secure military medical facility as we speak." "I'm coming up there," Armstrong declared. "Negative. I need you to continue with the tank restoration and investigation. I've assigned a full security detail to John Armstrong. He's in good hands." After the call ended, Armstrong paced the hangar floor, tension evident in every movement. They went after a 98-year-old man with dementia. Whatever secret he's keeping, they're willing to kill for it. "It's not just about what's in the documents," Emma reasoned. "The technical data, while valuable historically, wouldn't justify this level of risk. They must believe Grandpa John knows something that wasn't written down. Something about the bell itself." "We need to talk to him again," Armstrong insisted. "A focused conversation about the bell specifically might trigger his memory." "I've been thinking about that," Emma said. "There's an experimental treatment being used with dementia patients, using familiar environments and objects to stimulate recall of specific memories." Armstrong followed her gaze to the Sherman tank. "You want to put him inside Resilient. It might be our best chance to unlock his memories about the mission." Harmon nodded in agreement. "My father always said the bond between a tank crew is unlike any other. 5 men in a steel box, depending entirely on each other. Those memories are among the strongest we form." Armstrong considered the idea. It was unorthodox, potentially risky for an elderly man in John Armstrong's condition. But the alternative was allowing Schmidt to continue his pursuit while they remained ignorant of what they were truly protecting. "Let me make some calls." 2 days later, after extensive consultation with medical specialists and significant logistical arrangements, John Armstrong was transferred to Fort Hood under heavy security. The elderly man seemed confused by the sudden change in his routine, but became noticeably calmer when Thomas sat beside him in the medical transport vehicle. "Tommy?" The old man squinted at his grandson. "Are we going fishing?" Armstrong smiled gently. "Not today, Grandpa. I want to show you something. Something from a long time ago." The Sherman tank had been prepared according to medical recommendations. The interior had been cleaned and temperature controlled. Cushioned seating had been installed for comfort, and medical monitoring equipment stood ready nearby. A team consisting of Armstrong, Emma, Harmon, a military physician, and Dr. Carter from the care facility gathered as orderlies carefully helped John Armstrong from his wheelchair to the tank access hatch. "Do you recognize this, Grandpa?" Armstrong asked softly. The old man stared at the Sherman, his roomy eyes slowly focusing. For a moment, there was no reaction. Then his gnarled hand reached out, trembling, to touch the cold metal. "Resilient," he whispered, the word emerging with startling clarity. Armstrong exchanged a look of cautious optimism with Emma. "That's right. This is Resilient, your tank." With gentle assistance, John Armstrong was helped inside the Sherman. Thomas followed, positioning himself where the gunner would have sat, deliberately leaving the commander's position open for his grandfather. The effect was immediate and profound. John Armstrong's posture straightened, his eyes gained focus, and his hands moved to positions they had occupied thousands of times 80 years earlier. "Gunner, heat, German patrol, 2 o'clock, he suddenly barked, his voice stronger than it had been in years. Armstrong played along. "Identified. Fire and adjust. On the way." Armstrong mimicked the response, watching his grandfather carefully. John Armstrong's eye darted around the interior of the tank, taking in details, his mind clearly traveling back through time. "Reynolds, load armor piercing. Johnson, prepare to move on my command." Then abruptly his expression changed, the momentary clarity replaced by intense distress. "The bell! They're activating the bell. We have to stop them." Armstrong leaned forward. "What is the bell, Grandpa? What does it do?" "Deglaka," the old man muttered. "Project Kronos. They're trying to see through time." Emma, who had been observing from the turret opening, exchanged a startled look with Armstrong. "See through time?" Armstrong repeated. "You mean like a prediction device?" John Armstrong shook his head violently. "Not predict. See? Move things. They put people inside, test subjects, turn them inside out." His breathing became labored. "Keller said it could win the war, send messages back in time, change the outcome of battles before they happened." The military physician moved closer, monitoring the elderly man's vital signs with concern. "We need to conclude this soon," he warned quietly. Armstrong nodded but pressed on. "What happened to the bell, Grandpa? Where is it now?" John Armstrong's eyes focused on his grandson with sudden, piercing clarity. "We couldn't bring it back. Too dangerous. Keller said it had to be destroyed. We used the thermite charges, melted it down in the facility." "And the documents? The ones you put in the special compartment?" "Insurance," the old man replied. "Proof of what they were doing, the experiments, the theories, in case they tried to rebuild it." His hand clutched Armstrong's arm with surprising strength. "They're still trying, Tommy. They never stopped." His energy seemed to drain away suddenly, and the physician stepped in. "That's enough. We need to get him back to medical now." As they helped John Armstrong out of the tank, he grabbed his grandson one last time. 72 hours, he whispered. "We were there 72 hours. Time moved differently near the bell. Slower, faster. 72 hours felt like years." The medical team transferred the elderly man to a gurney, his momentary lucidity already fading. As they wheeled him away, Armstrong stood beside the tank, processing what he had heard. Emma joined him, her expression troubled. "Time manipulation? It sounds incredible." "It sounds impossible," Armstrong corrected. Yet the NSA analysis of those formulas suggested theories of torsion physics that could theoretically affect space-time. If the bell was destroyed in 1944, why is Schmidt so interested now? What's he hoping to find? Armstrong had no answer, but a growing sense of dread settled over him. Whatever his grandfather and the Resilient crew had encountered in that German facility had been beyond their understanding. Perhaps beyond anyone's understanding, even now. Later that evening, Armstrong sat alone in temporary quarters on the Fort Hood base, reviewing the day's revelations. His grandfather was resting comfortably under medical supervision, showing no ill effects from the tank experience. The brief window of lucidity had closed, but the information gained was potentially invaluable. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Emma holding a secure tablet. "We've got something," she said without preamble. NSA completed their analysis of all the documents from the compartment. Most of it confirms what we already suspected about Nazi research programs. But there's a new element. She set the tablet down, displaying a series of images. These photos weren't taken at Facility 47, where Grandpa John found the bell. They're from a different location entirely, what the documents call Facility 50, near the Austrian border. Armstrong examined the photos. They showed another underground complex, larger than the first, with multiple chambers containing equipment similar to what had been described as components of the Bell. A backup facility, he realized. They were building more than one. Emma nodded grimly. And according to these documents, at least one prototype was successfully tested before Allied forces overran the region. There's a reference to something called Operation Eagle's Nest, a plan to evacuate key scientists and critical research. Armstrong looked up sharply. Eagle's Nest was Hitler's mountain retreat in Berchtesgaden. Yes, but in this context, it appears to be a code name for an evacuation route, a way to get certain high-value assets out of Germany as the Reich collapsed. Emma swiped to another document. And this is where it gets interesting. There's a mention of the Southern Corridor in a list of names, scientists associated with the Bell Project. Several of these names appear in post-war records in Argentina. Operation Paperclip in reverse, Armstrong muttered, referring to the American program that had brought German scientists to the U.S. after the war. Instead of surrendering to Allied forces, these scientists escaped with their research. And possibly with a prototype of the Bell itself, Emma added. The implications were staggering. If even a fraction of what John Armstrong had described was true, if the Bell had indeed been a device capable of affecting time in some way, and if Nazi scientists had escaped with a working prototype, that's why Schmidt is so interested in Resilient and Grandpa John, Armstrong said. He's not after historical artifacts. He's trying to find the Bell, or at least enough information to recreate it, and he believes my grandfather knows where it went. Emma's phone rang. She answered, listened briefly, then ended the call, her expression grim. That was Cortez. They've identified the man who escaped from the care facility break-in. Klaus Schmidt himself, and there's more. Border Patrol just reported that Carlos Vega was found dead at his compound in Mexico, execution style. Armstrong stood, a cold determination settling over him. Schmidt is tying up loose ends. He knows we're getting close to whatever he's after. We need to accelerate the restoration of Resilient, Emma said. If there are any more clues hidden in that tank, we need to find them now. And we need to understand exactly what the Bell was capable of. If there's any truth to what Grandpa described, neither needed to complete the thought. The implications were clear. If Nazi scientists had indeed developed technology capable of manipulating time, and if that technology or the knowledge to recreate it still existed, the potential for catastrophe was immense. The next morning dawned with renewed urgency. Armstrong arrived at the restoration hangar to find Harmon already at work with a team of specialists. The Sherman tank was now partially disassembled, components laid out methodically on tarps surrounding it. We're going through every inch, Harmon explained. Every weld, every plate, every component. If there are any more hidden compartments or modifications, we'll find them. Armstrong nodded approvingly. Any progress so far? Nothing definitive yet, but there's something odd about the radio unit. It's period correct, but some of the internal components look different from standard issue. We're having them analyzed now. Emma arrived, accompanied by a civilian specialist in a rumpled suit. Dad, this is Dr. Alan Foster from Los Alamos National Laboratory. He's been briefed on the Bell Project and has insights about the theoretical physics involved. Dr. Foster, a thin man with perpetually startled eyes, shook Armstrong's hand distractedly. Fascinating material, Captain, simply fascinating. The equations in those documents describe principles of quantum mechanics that weren't even theorized until the 1970s. Whoever developed these formulas was decades ahead of conventional science. What exactly was the Bell supposed to do? Armstrong asked bluntly. My grandfather mentioned seeing through time, affecting time. Is that even possible? Foster adjusted his glasses. Theoretically? Yes, though we're still in the realm of hypothesis rather than proven science. The equations describe what we now call closed time-like curves, a theoretical phenomenon where time loops back on itself. Einstein's general relativity doesn't forbid such things, though they would require extraordinary energy and specific conditions. And the Nazis were trying to weaponize this? Based on these documents, yes. They seem to have been attempting two things. First, receiving information from the future to inform present decisions. Second, and more ambitiously, sending small objects backward in time. The practical applications for warfare would be immense. Armstrong thought of his grandfather's disturbed recollections. And human test subjects? The documents mentioned experiments. Foster's expression darkened. The energy requirements for manipulating space-time would generate extreme conditions, intense gravitational fields, radiation unlike anything we typically encounter. Exposing human subjects to such conditions without proper protection. He shook his head. The results would be catastrophic, exactly what your grandfather described. Cellular destruction at a fundamental level. As they spoke, a technician approached with a tablet. Sergeant Major Harmon asked me to show you this, sir. We found it inside the radio unit. Armstrong examined the screen. It showed what appeared to be a miniature film canister, the kind used for microfilm in the 1940s. Where is it now, he asked. Secure lab, sir. They're preparing to open it under controlled conditions. Armstrong turned to Emma. I want to be there when they do. In a small, brightly lit laboratory adjacent to the restoration hangar, Armstrong, Emma, and Dr. Foster gathered around a sterile workstation. A technician in a clean room suit carefully opened the film canister, revealing a tightly rolled strip of microfilm. With painstaking precision, the film was unspooled and mounted for viewing. As the first images appeared on the monitor, a collective intake of breath filled the room. The film contained schematics, detailed, precise technical drawings of a device that matched descriptions of the bell, a bell-shaped apparatus approximately 3 meters tall, with intricate internal components labeled in German technical terminology. My God, Foster whispered. It's real. The complete design specifications. Armstrong studied the images intently. Can it be built with current technology? Foster hesitated. Some components, yes. Others would require exotic materials and manufacturing processes that might still be beyond our capabilities. But the theoretical framework is sound. With sufficient resources and expertise, someone could potentially recreate this device. Someone like Schmidt, Emma said grimly. As the technician continued advancing through the microfilm, the schematics gave way to something else. Photographs and text documents, a record of a journey. This is after the mission, Armstrong realized. After they destroyed the original bell, the film documented the resilient crew's actions after returning to Allied lines, debriefings with intelligence officers, the decision to create cover identities, and most significantly, a mission to track down any remaining bell components or research that might have escaped. One document in particular caught Armstrong's attention. A report filed by Lieutenant John Armstrong in October 1944 describing intelligence regarding Nazi evacuation plans. Subject: Operation Eagle's Nest. Date: 10 October 1944. Classification: Top secret. Intelligence from captured documents and prisoner interrogation confirms evacuation plan for key scientific personnel and critical research materials. Primary evacuation route identified as proceeding through Switzerland to Italy, then by submarine to Argentina. High priority assigned to personnel and materials from Project Kronos, Die Glocke. Source: Whippoorwill confirms prototype device successfully tested at Facility 50 and scheduled for evacuation along southern corridor. Recommend immediate action to intercept convoy before reaching Swiss border. J.T. Armstrong, Lieutenant Special Operations Group. There was a second device, Emma said, stating what they were all thinking, and they were trying to get it out of Germany. Did they succeed? Armstrong wondered aloud. Did my grandfather's recommendation for immediate action get approved? The answer came in the next document, a terse after-action report describing an operation on October 15, 1944. A joint Army Air Forces and OSS mission to intercept a heavily guarded convoy near the Swiss border. The mission had been only partially successful. Several scientists had been captured and some research materials recovered. But the report ended with a disturbing notation. Primary target not recovered. Vehicle carrying device X diverted from main convoy prior to intercept. Current location unknown. Armstrong felt a cold weight settle in his chest. They lost it. The second bell escaped. And if it reached Argentina, Emma began, then it might still exist, Armstrong finished. 80 years later. Foster looked pale. If this device works as theorized, if it's been preserved all these years, and if someone with Schmidt's apparent resources were to obtain it, the implications hung in the air, too disturbing to voice aloud. A commotion outside the lab drew their attention. Through the glass walls, Armstrong saw Harmon rushing toward them, accompanied by several security personnel. "We got trouble?" Harmon announced as he entered. Base security just reported suspicious activity at the perimeter. Multiple breach attempts in the last hour. Armstrong's phone rang. Cortez again. "Thomas, are you secure?" "For the moment." "What's happening?" "We've intercepted communications." Schmidt is mounting an operation. Multiple teams heavily armed. Fort Hood security is responding, but you need to secure the tank and all related materials immediately. Where's my grandfather? Safe. We moved him to an undisclosed location this morning. But you and Emma need to evacuate now. Take only essential data. Destroy everything else. Armstrong ended the call and turned to the others. Schmidt is making his move. We need to secure all the Bell documentation and evacuate. Emma was already in motion, coordinating with security personnel to lock down the sensitive materials. What about resilient? We can't move a Sherman tank quickly. We don't need to, Armstrong replied. Schmidt wants what's inside it. The documentation, the microfilm, not the tank itself. Alarms began to sound throughout the facility. Through the windows, Armstrong could see security forces deploying across the base, vehicles moving into defensive positions. This is insane, Emma said. He's attacking a U.S. military base. That's an act of war. He's desperate, Armstrong replied. Whatever he's planning with the Bell must be worth the risk. As they secured the microfilm and prepared to move to a hardened shelter within the base, Armstrong found himself reflecting on his grandfather's experience 80 years earlier. John Armstrong and his crew had faced similar desperation from Nazi forces determined to recover their secret weapon. Now, generations later, the same battle continued. The security team led them through a service corridor toward an armored vehicle waiting outside. Armstrong carried a secure case containing the microfilm and other critical documents. Emma had downloaded the digital scans to an encrypted drive. Foster clutched his notes and calculations. As they emerged into the Texas sunlight, the sound of gunfire echoed from the direction of the base perimeter. Multiple alarms wailed, and the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors grew louder. "Move!" shouted the lead security officer, guiding them toward the waiting vehicle. They were halfway there when the world exploded around them. A deafening blast knocked Armstrong off his feet, sending him sprawling across the pavement. Through ringing ears, he heard shouting, more gunfire, the crack of bullets striking concrete. Rolling onto his side, he saw Emma taking cover behind a concrete barrier, her service weapon drawn. The security team was engaging multiple attackers, advancing from the direction of a breached perimeter fence. Armstrong scrambled to his feet, clutching the secure case. His military training kicked in automatically, assessing the situation, identifying the nearest cover. He spotted Harmon pulling defer Foster behind a parked truck, shielding the civilian with his body. "Get to the vehicle!" Armstrong shouted to Emma, pointing toward the armored transport, now partially hidden by smoke from the explosion. Emma nodded, providing covering fire as Armstrong made a dash for the truck, where Harmon and Foster had taken refuge. Bullets pinged off metal and concrete around them. "We need to split up," Armstrong told Harmon. "They want these documents. If we're all together, we're one target." Harmon nodded grimly. "What's the plan?" "You and Foster take the transport. Emma and I will go separately with the case and the drive. We'll rendezvous at Fallback Position Alpha." Fallback Position Alpha was a predetermined secure location they had established as part of their contingency planning. A small ranch house 30 miles from the base, owned by a retired Army colonel who had served under Cortez. Armstrong passed the secure case to Harmon. "The microfilm is inside. Get it to Cortez if we don't make it." "We'll make it," Harmon assured him, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Armstrong moved to where Emma was positioned, keeping low to avoid the gunfire. "Change of plans," he told her. "Harmon and Foster are taking the transport with the microfilm. We're going separately with the drive." Emma nodded, understanding the strategy. "There's a Humvee behind that maintenance building. Keys should be inside. Cover me to the corner, then follow when I signal." Armstrong waited for a pause in the gunfire, then sprinted toward the maintenance building. Staying low and using available cover, he reached the corner unscathed and peered around. The Humvee was there, apparently undamaged. He signaled to Emma, who began making her way toward him while security personnel provided covering fire. Across the compound, Armstrong saw Harmon and Foster successfully reach the armored transport, which began moving almost immediately, crashing through a chain-link fence to avoid the main engagement area. Emma reached him, breathing hard but focused. "Harmon's clear. Let's move." They reached the Humvee without incident. Armstrong took the wheel while Emma scanned their surroundings, weapon ready. The vehicle started on the first try, its powerful engine roaring to life. "Hold on," Armstrong warned, then accelerated hard, taking a service road that led away from the main fight. In the rearview mirror, he saw several figures notice their departure and begin pursuing in a civilian pickup truck. "We've got company," Emma reported, checking her weapon. "Black pickup, 4 occupants, all armed. Armstrong pushed the Humvee faster, his hands steady on the wheel as they bounced over the uneven road. His mind flashed back to another drive decades earlier, navigating an M1 Abrams through the Iraqi desert, enemy forces in pursuit. The pickup gained on them as they reached a paved road outside the base perimeter. A burst of gunfire shattered the Humvee's rear window. Emma turned in her seat, returning fire carefully through the broken window. "We can't outrun them. That truck's been modified." Armstrong scanned the road ahead, looking for options. "There," he said, spotting a turnoff leading into a densely wooded area. "We'll use the trees for cover." He wrenched the wheel hard, sending the Humvee careening onto the dirt track. The pursuing pickup followed, but its higher center of gravity made the turn more difficult, forcing it to slow. The forest closed around them, branches scraping against the sides of the Humvee as Armstrong navigated the narrow path. Behind them, the pickup was having an even harder time, its wider body barely fitting between the trees. "We need to split them up," Armstrong decided. "Force them to pursue on foot where we have the advantage of knowing where we're going." Emma nodded, checking the encrypted drive was secure in her pocket. "How far to the rendezvous point?" "About 25 miles, but we can't lead them there." Armstrong spotted a creek ahead, the dirt track crossing it at a shallow ford. Instead of following the path across, he turned sharply, driving the Humvee directly into the creek bed. The water was only a foot deep, allowing the high-clearance military vehicle to continue upstream, hidden from view by the creek banks. Behind them, the pickup skidded to a stop at the ford, its occupants leaping out to search for their quarry. "That won't fool them for long," Emma warned. "It doesn't need to, just long enough to gain some distance." They continued along the creek for nearly a mile before finding another crossing point. Armstrong guided the Humvee up the bank and back onto solid ground, now well away from their pursuers. "We'll need to abandon the vehicle soon," he said. "It's too conspicuous, and they'll be looking for it." Emma was already on her phone, using a secure line to contact Cortez. "Sir, we're clear of the initial pursuit, but separated from Harmon and Foster. Armstrong and I have the digital copies, proceeding to fallback alpha." She paused, listening. "Understood. We'll comply." She ended the call, her expression troubled. "Change of plans. Cortez wants us at a different location. There's been another development." "What kind of development?" "He wouldn't say over the phone, just that it's urgent and related to Schmidt's endgame." She showed Armstrong the coordinates Cortez had sent, a location approximately 50 miles south of their current position. Armstrong frowned. "That's not one of our predetermined fallback positions." "No, but Cortez was explicit. He said to tell you Thunderbolt vouches for it. Said you'd understand." Thunderbolt, his grandfather's old call sign, a code phrase they had established to verify authentic communications. "All right, we'll ditch the Humvee soon and acquire alternate transportation. Stay off main roads." They drove for another 20 minutes before finding a small town with a used car lot on its outskirts. Using emergency funds and identification provided for just such contingencies, they purchased an unremarkable sedan, paying cash and providing minimal information. Leaving the Humvee hidden behind an abandoned warehouse, they transferred to the sedan and continued south, taking back roads and constantly checking for signs of pursuit. As they drove, Armstrong's thoughts returned to his grandfather and the mission 80 years earlier. 5 men in a tank carrying secrets that could change the course of history, pursued by forces determined to recover those secrets at any cost. The parallels were undeniable, history repeating itself across generations. "What do you think Schmidt's after?" Emma asked, breaking the silence. If the bell really could manipulate time in some way. Armstrong kept his eyes on the road. "I've been wondering that myself. Best case, he's a fanatical collector who wants to prove the superiority of Nazi science. Worst case, he wants to use it," Emma finished. "But use it how? Even if it works as theorized, the practical applications would be limited by the technology of the 1940s. Unless it's been refined, improved, 80 years is a long time for development, especially if some of those original scientists escaped to Argentina." The implications hung between them, too disturbing to elaborate further. A device that could send information through time, potentially altering the past. In the hands of neo-Nazi ideologues, such technology could threaten the very foundation of the post-war world. As the sun began to set, they approached the coordinates Cortez had provided. The location turned out to be a small private airfield, consisting of a single runway, a control tower, and several hangars. The facility appeared deserted except for a single jet parked near the largest hangar. Armstrong drove cautiously through the open gate, scanning for any sign of threat. Emma kept her hand near her weapon, equally vigilant. As they approached the hangar, a familiar figure emerged. William Cortez, still imposing despite his age, accompanied by two security personnel. Armstrong parked the sedan and stepped out, relief mingling with caution. "General, good to see you in one piece." Cortez nodded. "Likewise, Captain Major, I'm glad you made it safely." "What's the urgent development?" Emma asked, coming to stand beside her father. Cortez gestured toward the hangar. "It's easier to show you. We've received intelligence that confirms our worst fears about Schmidt's intentions." Inside the hangar, they found not just Harmon and Foster, who had arrived safely with the microfilm, but a sophisticated command center had been established. Multiple screens displayed satellite imagery, data feeds, and surveillance footage. Schmidt's attack on Fort Hood was a diversion, Cortez explained, leading them to a central display. His main force was elsewhere, pursuing a different objective. The screen showed thermal imagery of an excavation site somewhere in a mountainous region. "This is northern Argentina, near the Chilean border," Cortez continued, "a remote location where, according to recently declassified CIA files, a group of German scientists established a research facility in 1946. Armstrong studied the footage intently. "They're digging something up." "Not digging up, breaking into." Cortez zoomed in on the image. Ground-penetrating radar shows a concrete bunker approximately 30 meters beneath the surface. Construction matches known Nazi engineering techniques from the 1940s. "The bell," Emma whispered. "They found it." "We believe so," Cortez confirmed. Intercepted communications between Schmidt and his team referenced securing the primary artifact and preparation for the demonstration. "Demonstration," Armstrong repeated. "He's planning to activate it?" Foster, who had been examining the data, spoke up. "If he's found an intact device after all these years, there's no guarantee it would function as designed. The materials would have degraded, power systems failed. Unless it was designed for long-term storage," Cortez countered. "The Nazis built some bunkers to last centuries, and we're seeing evidence of significant power generation equipment being delivered to the site." Armstrong turned to face Cortez directly. "What's our play here, Bill? This is Argentinian territory. We can't just send in troops." "No, but we have alternatives. A joint task force is being assembled. Diplomatic channels are being used to secure Argentinian cooperation. But there's a time factor involved." Cortez pointed to a countdown clock on one of the screens. "Based on power buildups at the site, we estimate Schmidt is planning whatever demonstration he has in mind within 72 hours. The number struck Armstrong like a physical blow. 72 hours. The same duration his grandfather and the Resilient crew had spent behind enemy lines 80 years earlier. The same time span they now faced to prevent Schmidt from potentially altering history itself. Harmon approached, his expression grim but determined. "What do you need from us, General?" Cortez looked at each of them in turn. "Your expertise, your knowledge of what we're truly facing, and most importantly, your willingness to finish what your predecessors started 80 years ago." Armstrong met Emma's eyes, seeing in them the same resolution he felt. Whatever dangers lay ahead, whatever Schmidt was planning, they would face it together, just as the crew of Resilient had done before them. 72 hours, Armstrong said. "Let's make them count." The Argentine sun beat down mercilessly on the mountainside camp, its harsh light revealing a hive of activity. Men in tactical gear moved with military precision around heavy equipment. Generators hummed. Satellite dishes tracked the sky. At the center of it all gaped a massive tunnel entrance, freshly excavated from the rocky slope, its reinforced concrete frame bearing the unmistakable engineering hallmarks of the Third Reich. Thomas Armstrong studied the scene through high-powered binoculars from a concealed position 2 kilometers away. Beside him, Emma lay prone, documenting the camp with a long-range camera. The dry mountain air carried sound deceptively well, allowing them to occasionally catch the distant bark of orders in German accented Spanish. "I count 28 personnel," Armstrong said quietly. "Multiple defensive positions, heavy weapons." Emma nodded, not pausing in her photography. "The main excavation appears complete. They're bringing in specialized equipment now. Power generation, cooling systems." The past 24 hours had been a blur of activity. After Schmidt's attack on Fort Hood, Cortez had leveraged his considerable influence to assemble a rapid response team. A private jet had transported Armstrong, Emma, Harmon, and 2 special forces operators to Argentina, where local intelligence assets had provided transportation and equipment. Dr. Foster had remained behind with Cortez, analyzing the recovered documentation, and coordinating with scientific experts to better understand what they might be facing. Officially, they were not here. The diplomatic channels Cortez mentioned were still grinding slowly forward. This was a reconnaissance mission only, intended to gather intelligence on Schmidt's operation before Argentine authorities could be convinced to act. Unofficially, Armstrong knew they might be the only ones positioned to prevent whatever Schmidt had planned. The clock was ticking. 48 hours remained of their 72-hour window. Movement at the main entrance, Emma reported, adjusting her camera. Looks like our primary target. Armstrong shifted his binoculars. A black SUV had arrived at the camp perimeter. From it emerged a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed despite the remote location. Klaus Schmidt. Even from this distance, Armstrong could sense the man's authority as personnel snapped to attention around him. Schmidt moved with purpose toward the tunnel entrance, flanked by armed guards and what appeared to be technical specialists carrying equipment cases. He's here to oversee final preparations, Armstrong guessed. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. Emma captured a series of clear images of Schmidt, then lowered her camera. We should pull back, report what we found. Armstrong continued observing for another moment. Something about the scene triggered memories of his grandfather's journal entries. The frantic activity, the sense of desperate purpose, history repeating itself across generations. They retreated carefully to their concealed vehicle, a rugged four-wheel drive provided by local assets. Harmon waited with the engine running, his expression expectant. Schmidt's on site, Armstrong reported as they climbed in. Full operation in progress. Harmon nodded grimly. Our satellite uplink is ready. The general is standing by. Their temporary base of operations was a vacant hunting lodge 30 kilometers from Schmidt's camp. Remote enough to avoid detection, close enough to monitor the situation. Inside, the rustic interior had been transformed with modern communications equipment and tactical gear. On a secure video link, Cortez appeared, the Pentagon visible in the background. His expression was grave as Armstrong delivered his report. So Schmidt is personally overseeing the operation, Cortez said when Armstrong finished. That confirms our intelligence about the importance of whatever they're extracting from that bunker. Have we made any progress with the Argentine government? Emma asked. Cortez frowned. Limited. They're concerned about sovereignty issues and lack of concrete evidence. They've agreed to send investigators, but not for another 48 hours. Too late, Armstrong said flatly. Whatever Schmidt is planning will happen before then, which is why we need options. Cortez leaned closer to the camera. Dr. Foster has made progress analyzing the Bell documentation. I'm patching him in now. The screen split to include Foster, who looked as if he hadn't slept in days. Papers covered the table before him, and multiple digital displays showed complex equations and schematics. Captain Armstrong, I've been studying the technical documentation recovered from your grandfather's tank, cross-referencing it with modern theoretical physics. Foster's words tumbled out rapidly. The device they called the Bell appears to have been designed to generate a localized torsion field using counter-rotating cylinders containing an unstable metallic compound. In English, Doctor, Harmon requested. Foster blinked, then nodded. Simply put, the Bell creates a bubble where the normal rules of space-time are temporarily altered. The Nazi scientists were initially trying to create a weapon that could disable electrical systems or cause biological damage without conventional explosives. But they discovered something far more significant. Time manipulation, Armstrong said. Yes, their experiments suggested that information could be transmitted backward through time within the torsion field. Not physical objects, but electromagnetic signals. Essentially, they believed they could send messages to the past. Armstrong exchanged a troubled look with Emma. Messages that could change history. Foster nodded soberly. Imagine Hitler receiving detailed information about Allied invasion plans, troop movements, technological developments. The entire outcome of the war could have been altered. But it didn't happen, Harmon pointed out. So either they never got it working or someone stopped them, Armstrong finished, thinking of his grandfather. Cortez spoke up. The prototype your grandfather destroyed at Facility 47 was their primary research model, but the documentation suggests they had constructed at least one operational device, which was evacuated as Allied forces advanced. The one Schmidt has found, Emma concluded. Foster looked deeply troubled. Based on power requirements and equipment we've observed being delivered to the site, I believe Schmidt is preparing to activate the device. The question is, what message does he intend to send and to whom? The implications hung heavy in the air. A neo-Nazi ideologue with the ability to send information into the past could potentially undo the Allied victory, creating an unimaginable alternate reality. We need to know exactly what he's planning before we can determine how to stop him, Armstrong said. We need someone inside that camp. Cortez's expression hardened. That would require operating on foreign soil without authorization. If captured, the U.S. government would deny any knowledge of your actions. Armstrong met the general's gaze steadily. My grandfather faced the same situation 80 years ago. He didn't hesitate. After a long moment, Cortez nodded. Very well, but this is strictly reconnaissance. Determine what Schmidt is planning and report back. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. As the call ended, Emma turned to her father. You're not seriously planning to infiltrate that camp? Not the camp, Armstrong replied. The bunker. All the activity is focused on the entrance. There may be another way in. Harmon, who had been studying satellite imagery of the region, spoke up. These old Nazi bunkers typically had emergency exits, ventilation shafts. If this facility was built to the same specifications as others we've documented, there should be secondary access points. Emma looked from Harmon to her father, then sighed in resignation. When do we start? Armstrong shook his head. Not we, me. I'm going alone. That's not happening, Emma said flatly. Someone needs to maintain communication with Cortez, coordinate with any Argentine authorities that might actually respond. That's you. And Harmon needs to prepare our extraction plan for when this is over. And you need someone to watch your back, Emma countered. This isn't a debate, Dad. I'm going with you. Armstrong recognized the determined set of her jaw. The same expression he'd seen in the mirror countless times. The same expression his grandfather had worn in old photographs. The Armstrong stubbornness, passed down through generations. All right, he conceded. We go together. Harmon stays as our lifeline. They spent the remainder of the day preparing. Satellite imagery revealed what appeared to be a ventilation outlet on the far side of the mountain, well away from Schmidt's main camp. Approaching at night would give them the best chance of avoiding detection. As the sun set behind the mountains, Armstrong checked his equipment one final time. Lightweight tactical gear, night vision, communications, a sidearm, though he hoped it wouldn't be needed. This was about intelligence gathering, not confrontation. Emma finished securing her own gear, her movements precise and practiced. Despite the tension between them over the years, Armstrong couldn't help feeling a surge of pride. She was every bit the soldier he had been, with an intelligence officer's shrewd mind added to her capabilities. Ready? He asked simply. She nodded. Ready. Harmon would drive them to a drop point 5 kilometers from the ventilation shaft, then return to the lodge to coordinate their extraction. As they prepared to depart, he approached Armstrong with an object wrapped in cloth. I thought you might want this, Harmon said, unwrapping the package to reveal an old service pistol. It belonged to my father. He carried it during their mission to Facility 47 with your grandfather. Armstrong accepted the weapon with reverence. Thank you, Michael. I'll return it safely. Harmon nodded. My father would be proud to know it was being used to finish what they started. The night drive was tense but uneventful. They traveled without headlights, using night vision to navigate the rugged terrain. At the drop point, Armstrong and Emma exited silently, each carrying the minimum equipment necessary for the mission. 36 hours remaining, Harmon reminded them, checking his watch. Communications check every hour. If you miss 2 checks, I notify Cortez and initiate emergency extraction. Armstrong clasped the man's shoulder. We'll be back before then. The mountain terrain was challenging even for experienced operators. They moved carefully through rocky slopes and sparse vegetation, using natural features for concealment. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the southern hemisphere sky, providing just enough ambient light to supplement their night vision equipment. 2 hours of careful navigation brought them within sight of their objective. The ventilation shaft was exactly where satellite imagery had suggested, a concrete structure protruding from the mountainside, partially concealed by natural rock formations. No visible security, Emma whispered, scanning the area. Either they don't know about this access point, or they're confident no one would find it, Armstrong finished. Let's not disappoint them. The shaft entrance was secured by a rusted metal grate. Decades of exposure had weakened the mountings, allowing them to remove it with minimal tools and noise. Beyond lay a vertical passage approximately 1 meter in diameter, with metal rungs embedded in the concrete. Armstrong tested the nearest rung. Despite its age, it held firm, German engineering, built to last. I'll go first, he said, securing a thin climbing rope to his harness. 10-meter intervals, then communication check. Emma nodded, taking the other end of the rope. Understood. The descent was slow and methodical. The shaft extended deep into the mountain, the air growing cooler and heavy with moisture. Armstrong counted the rungs as he descended. 10 meters, 20, 30. At 50 meters, he noticed a change. The natural acoustic properties of the shaft carried sounds from below. Mechanical humming, the distant echo of voices. We're getting close, he whispered into his communication device. I can hear activity below. Emma's voice came back clearly. Understood. Continuing descent. At approximately 70 meters depth, the vertical shaft connected to a horizontal tunnel. Armstrong eased himself onto the tunnel floor, then signaled for Emma to complete her descent. The tunnel was narrow but tall enough to stand in, concrete-lined and remarkably well-preserved. Emergency lighting strips, recently installed, cast a dim blue glow along the passage. Someone's been here recently, Armstrong observed, noting fresh scuff marks on the floor. Probably Schmidt's technical team assessing the facility. They moved cautiously along the tunnel, which sloped gradually downward. After approximately 200 meters, it opened into a larger space. Armstrong halted at the threshold, surveying what lay beyond. They had entered what appeared to be a secondary equipment room of the main facility. Banks of antique electrical equipment lined the walls, covered in decades of dust, except where recent activity had disturbed it. Modern cables had been run alongside original wiring, connecting to portable power units and diagnostic equipment. They're restoring power to the original systems, Emma whispered, examining a junction box where new components had been spliced into vintage technology. Armstrong nodded, restoring it to operational status. They navigated carefully through the equipment room, alert for any sign of Schmidt's personnel. A doorway at the far end led to a short corridor, which in turn opened onto a metal catwalk overlooking a massive chamber. Armstrong's breath caught in his throat. Below them stretched a vast underground facility, its center dominated by an apparatus that could only be the bell. It stood approximately 3 meters tall, shaped indeed like a bell, its metal surface a dull gray except where recent cleaning had revealed a brighter sheen. Around it, concentric rings of equipment formed a complex array of power distribution systems, monitoring stations, and what appeared to be protective barriers. Schmidt's team was hard at work throughout the chamber. Technicians monitored modern equipment connected to the vintage systems. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. And there, on a raised platform overlooking the bell itself, stood Schmidt, deep in conversation with what appeared to be the lead scientist. We need to get closer, Armstrong whispered. Hear what they're saying. Emma pointed to a maintenance ladder that would allow them to descend to a lower level of catwalks, potentially within earshot of Schmidt's position. With extreme caution, they made their way down, using equipment and structural elements for concealment. On the lower catwalk, partially hidden behind a large electrical cabinet, they could finally make out the conversation on the platform below. The power systems are at 90% capacity, Herr Schmidt, the scientist was saying, his German accent pronounced. We will be ready to initiate the sequence within 12 hours. Excellent, Dr. Voigt. Schmidt's voice carried clearly, resonant and cultured. And the transmission package? Prepared according to your specifications. All the technical data, strategic information, and personal warnings. Once the torsion field stabilizes, the electromagnetic pulse will carry the information back along the time stream to the receiver. And you're certain it will reach the correct point? Schmidt pressed. The calibration is precise, July 20th, 1944, exactly as you requested. Armstrong felt a chill. July 20th, 1944, the date of Operation Valkyrie, the failed attempt to assassinate Hitler and overthrow the Nazi regime. Emma had clearly made the same connection, her eyes widening as she looked at her father. Voigt continued, once received, the information will allow the Fuhrer to identify the conspirators before they act, crush the resistance within the military, and implement the advanced weapons programs years ahead of schedule. Creating the world that should have been, Schmidt said, satisfaction evident in his tone. A 1,000-year Reich, not a shameful defeat. Armstrong had heard enough. They needed to report this immediately and formulate a plan to stop Schmidt's insanity. He signaled to Emma that they should withdraw. As they carefully retraced their steps to the equipment room, Armstrong's mind raced. Schmidt wasn't just trying to recover lost Nazi technology. He was attempting to change history itself, to alter the outcome of World War II by sending critical information back in time to Hitler on the eve of the assassination attempt. If he succeeded, the implications were unimaginable. A Nazi Germany armed with advanced weapons, purged of internal opposition, warned of Allied strategies years in advance. The entire course of the 20th century would be rewritten. They had almost reached the tunnel entrance when a shout echoed through the equipment room. They had been spotted. "Intruders! East equipment room!" Armstrong pushed Emma toward the tunnel. "Go. Get this information to Cortez." "I'm not leaving you," she replied, drawing her sidearm. "That's an order, Major," Armstrong said sharply. "The mission comes first." Before she could protest further, armed guards burst into the equipment room from the main chamber. Armstrong shoved Emma through the tunnel entrance, then turned to face the approaching men, drawing Harmon's father's pistol. "Go," he shouted, firing 2 shots at the overhead lighting, plunging the room into darkness except for the dim emergency strips. In the confusion, Emma had no choice but to retreat into the tunnel. Armstrong ducked behind a bank of electrical equipment as bullets ricocheted off metal and concrete around him. He had no illusion of escaping. His goal now was to buy Emma enough time to reach the surface and relay what they had learned. If that meant his own capture, so be it. The mission was everything, just as it had been for his grandfather 80 years earlier. A bullet grazed his arm, sending a hot lance of pain through his flesh. Armstrong returned fire judiciously, making each shot count. When his weapon clicked empty, he knew his time was up. "I'm unarmed," he called out in clear German, raising his hands. "I surrender." Lights blazed as portable lamps illuminated the room. 4 armed men approached cautiously, weapons trained on him. "On your knees," one ordered in accented English. Armstrong complied, hands behind his head. As they secured him with zip ties, he felt a strange sense of calm. Emma would make it out. She would warn Cortez. The mission would continue. He was marched through the main chamber toward the platform where Schmidt waited. The bell loomed nearby, technicians continuing their work despite the intrusion, a testament to the operation's pressing timeline. Schmidt studied Armstrong with cold curiosity as the guards forced him to his knees on the platform. "Captain Thomas Armstrong," Schmidt said, surprising Armstrong with his knowledge. "I wondered if we might meet. Your grandfather caused my family considerable trouble." Armstrong maintained his silence, assessing his situation. The zip ties were secure but not over-tight. The guards were professional but not elite. Most importantly, Schmidt seemed inclined to talk, which bought time for Emma's escape. "Nothing to say, Captain? No questions about how I know your name, your connection to this affair?" "I assume you've been watching us since the tank was discovered," Armstrong replied evenly. Schmidt smiled thinly. "Indeed, Carlos Vega was in my employ from the beginning. When your government seized the tank, I knew it would only be a matter of time before John Armstrong's descendants became involved." He began to pace, hands clasped behind his back. "Your grandfather interfered with the most important scientific breakthrough of the 20th century. He destroyed years of research, set back human progress immeasurably, all in the name of short-sighted Allied victory. He prevented monsters from accessing a technology they would have used for genocide on an unimaginable scale," Armstrong countered. Schmidt waved this away dismissively. "Politics, propaganda. What matters is the technology itself, the ability to communicate across time, to correct mistakes of the past, to create a better future. By helping Hitler win the war, by creating a world order based on strength and vision, not the chaotic democracy that has led humanity to the brink of self-destruction." Schmidt stopped pacing, looking Armstrong directly in the eyes. "But I'm not interested in debating politics with you, Captain. I'm interested in what else you know about the bell. What other information your grandfather might have passed down." "Nothing that would help you," Armstrong replied. "He destroyed the original device for good reason." Schmidt studied him for a moment, then nodded to one of the guards. "Search him thoroughly." Armstrong remained still as rough hands patted him down, removing his remaining equipment. The guard produced his satellite phone, which Schmidt examined with interest. "Communicating with someone outside? Your companion, perhaps?" Schmidt looked toward the equipment room. "Find the other intruder. They can't have gone far." 2 guards moved quickly toward the tunnel. Armstrong maintained his composure, knowing Emma had a substantial head start. Schmidt turned to the lead scientist. "Dr. Voigt, how will this delay affect our timetable?" "It changes nothing, Herr Schmidt. The system will reach full power in 11 hours. We can activate as planned." Schmidt nodded in satisfaction. "Excellent." He turned back to Armstrong. "You will witness history being rewritten, Captain, a fitting punishment for your family's interference." Armstrong was taken to a small storage room that had been converted into a makeshift cell. His injuries were superficial, the graze on his arm painful but not serious. As the door locked behind him, he immediately began testing his restraints, seeking any weakness. The zip ties were standard police issue, strong but not infallible. With the proper technique, they could be broken. Armstrong had been trained in such methods during his military career. He positioned his bound hands, took a deep breath, and executed a sharp downward strike against his lower back. The plastic snapped, freeing his hands. This small victory did little to improve his overall situation. The cell was secure, the door solid metal with a reinforced lock. Even if he could somehow escape the room, he was deep underground in a facility full of armed guards. His best hope remained Emma successfully contacting Cortez and initiating a response. Hours passed. Armstrong alternated between rest and vigilance, conserving his strength while remaining alert for any opportunity. Occasionally, he could hear activity outside his cell as Schmidt's operation continued its preparations. Finally, the door opened. Two guards entered, weapons ready, followed by Schmidt himself. "It seems your companion escaped," Schmidt said, his tone conversational. "Impressive, but ultimately futile. Even if they reach your superiors, any response will come too late. We activate the bell in 1 hour." Armstrong said nothing, noting that Schmidt had not yet realized his hands were free. The knowledge might provide a crucial advantage at some critical moment. "I thought you might have liked to witness the culmination of what your grandfather tried to prevent," Schmidt continued. "A historical moment deserves an audience, even an unwilling one." Armstrong was escorted back to the main chamber, where the atmosphere had changed noticeably. The previous methodical work had given way to an almost ceremonial preparation. Technicians moved with practiced precision, checking systems, confirming readings. Armed guards had taken positions at all access points, their vigilance heightened. The bell itself had transformed. What had been a dull metal construction now hummed with power, subtle vibrations sending ripples through the air around it. Cables and conduits pulsed with energy. Monitoring stations displayed readings in constant flux. Schmidt led Armstrong to the platform overlooking the apparatus. Dr. Voigt approached, tablet in hand. "All systems nominal, Herr Schmidt. The torsion field generators are primed. Power systems at maximum capacity. Data package loaded and verified." "Begin the activation sequence," Schmidt ordered. Armstrong watched as the technical team initiated the startup procedure. Lights dimmed throughout the facility as power was diverted to the bell. A low humming filled the chamber, gradually increasing in both volume and pitch. The air around the device seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. "Remarkable, isn't it?" Schmidt said, observing Armstrong's reaction. "Technology developed 80 years ago, yet still beyond what most modern scientists believe possible. Further proof of the genius that could have reshaped our world." "Genius built on the suffering of innocent victims," Armstrong replied. "Human test subjects worked to death in concentration camps. Your glorious Reich was built on mountains of corpses." Schmidt's expression hardened. "History is written by the victors, Captain. After today, that history will be rewritten." The humming intensified. The bell began to rotate, slowly at first, then faster. Within its structure, counter-rotating drums became visible, containing a shimmering metallic substance. "Torsion field stabilizing," Voigt reported, "approaching transmission threshold." Armstrong tensed, recognizing that the moment of activation was near. Whatever he might do to interfere, it had to be now. His hands were free, but he remained surrounded by armed guards. A direct attempt to damage the bell would be suicidal and likely futile. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a vibration passed through the facility. Not from the bell, but from somewhere above. A distant rumble that gradually intensified. Schmidt noticed it too, his expression shifting from triumph to concern. "What is that, Voigt?" The scientist checked his instruments. Confusion evident. "Seismic activity? No, it's too regular, almost like..." "Explosives," Armstrong finished, unable to suppress a smile. "Breaching charges." As if in confirmation, the facility's lights flickered. Dust rained from the ceiling. The distant sound of gunfire echoed through the corridors. Schmidt's face contorted with rage. "Secure the bell! Nothing must interfere with the transmission." He turned to the guards holding Armstrong. "Take him back to the cell. Kill him if there's any attempt at rescue." As Armstrong was roughly dragged from the platform, chaos erupted throughout the chamber. Personnel ran to defensive positions, alarms blared. The rhythmic thud of helicopter rotors became audible, even through layers of mountain rock. The assault had begun. Armstrong's guards hustled him toward the storage room corridor. In the confusion, one guard glanced back toward the main chamber, momentarily distracted. It was the opportunity Armstrong had been waiting for. In a single fluid motion, he brought his freed hands forward, disarming the nearest guard with a technique honed through years of close-quarters combat training. The second guard turned too late, receiving a precision strike to the throat that left him gasping for air. Armstrong retrieved both weapons, checking that they were ready to fire. The main chamber had descended into chaotic defensive preparations, no one yet aware of his escape. He needed to act quickly, both to assist whatever forces were attacking and to prevent Schmidt from activating the bell. Moving with purpose, Armstrong made his way back toward the platform. The bell was now rotating rapidly, the air around it distorting visibly as the torsion field began to form. Voight and his team worked frantically at the controls, attempting to complete the activation sequence despite the attack. Schmidt stood watching the process, his back to Armstrong, attention fixed on the culmination of his plans. "Step away from the controls," Armstrong called out, weapon raised. Schmidt turned slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to calculating assessment. "Captain Armstrong, I underestimated your resourcefulness." "Order them to shut it down," Armstrong demanded, indicating Voight and the technical team. "I'm afraid that's impossible," Schmidt replied. "The process has reached the autonomous phase. Nothing can stop it now except complete power failure." As if on cue, a massive explosion rocked the facility. The main lights failed, replaced seconds later by emergency systems. The bell's rotation faltered momentarily, then continued. "Backup generators engaged," Voight reported. "Torsion field integrity at 60% and stabilizing. Transmission in 3 minutes." Armstrong assessed his options rapidly. Direct fire on the bell might be catastrophic, potentially releasing whatever energy was building within the torsion field. The control systems were his best target, but Voight stood between him and the main console. Above, the sounds of combat intensified. Whoever was coming had encountered significant resistance. They might not reach the chamber in time to prevent activation. "Last chance, Schmidt," Armstrong warned. "Order them to abort." Schmidt smiled thinly. "Even if I could, why would I? I've spent my life preparing for this moment. The fulfillment of my grandfather's vision, the world reborn as it should have been." "Your grandfather? He was part of the original project?" SS Obersturmbannführer Heinrich Schmidt, lead security officer for Project Kronos. He recognized the bell's potential even when his superiors wavered. He arranged for the prototype to be evacuated, established the bunker we stand in now. Schmidt's expression hardened, and he was executed in 1946 for war crimes after being captured by American forces led by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cortez. The name struck Armstrong with unexpected force. Richard Cortez, William Cortez's father. The connection his grandfather had mentioned in his journal. "Today I avenge my grandfather's death and restore the future he fought for," Schmidt continued. "In 2 minutes, the new timeline begins." Armstrong had heard enough. He fired a precise shot that struck the main control panel, sending sparks flying. Voight and his technicians dove for cover. The bell's rotation wavered again, but continued. "Auxiliary systems compensating," Voight called out. "Field integrity holding at 40%. Not enough damage." Armstrong needed to disable the power supply completely. He scanned the chamber, identifying the main power conduits feeding into the bell apparatus. They ran exposed along the chamber floor, connecting to distribution nodes that could not be easily armored due to heat dissipation requirements. As Schmidt drew a concealed weapon, Armstrong was already moving, diving behind equipment for cover, while firing targeted shots at the power conduits. Sparks erupted where bullets severed connections. The bell's rotation began to falter noticeably. "No!" Schmidt shouted, firing wildly at Armstrong's position. "Reroute power. Maintain the field." Voight scrambled to obey, directing his remaining technicians to bypass damaged systems. The bell continued to slow, but the core mechanisms remained active. 1 minute to transmission, Voight reported, his voice strained. "Field integrity at 30%, minimal viable threshold." It was still going to activate. Armstrong needed something more decisive than gunfire to disable the power systems. His gaze fell on the fuel tanks for the backup generators, positioned against the far wall of the chamber. A direct hit would trigger a significant explosion, potentially enough to disrupt the entire power grid. The distance was considerable, the angle difficult, the risk of collateral damage high, But the alternative was allowing Schmidt to potentially rewrite history itself. Armstrong took careful aim, steadied his breathing, and fired. The first shot struck the nearest tank but failed to penetrate its reinforced shell. The second found a fitting connection, releasing a spray of fuel. The third ignited it. The explosion was immediate and devastating. A fireball erupted from the generator area, engulfing nearby equipment and personnel. The shockwave rippled through the chamber, shattering monitoring stations and toppling equipment racks. The bell's rotation stuttered, then ceased entirely as power failed throughout the facility. Emergency lighting flickered, then stabilized at a minimal level. Smoke began to fill the chamber as secondary fires broke out among damaged equipment. "No!" Schmidt's anguished cry echoed through the chaos. "Void! Restore power! We were so close!" But the scientist lay unmoving near the shattered control console, either dead or unconscious from the explosion. Most of the technical team had fled or were incapacitated. The bell itself still stood, but dark and silent. The torsion field collapsed. Armstrong emerged from cover, weapon trained on Schmidt. "It's over. Whatever you hope to change stays changed. History remains as it was written." Schmidt's face contorted with rage and despair. "You have no idea what you've done. The world that could have been. The order, the purpose, all lost because of your family's interference. Twice. A world built on genocide and oppression isn't worth creating," Armstrong replied. "My grandfather understood that. That's why he destroyed the first bell. That's why this one will never operate either." For a moment, Schmidt seemed ready to attack despite the weapon aimed at him. Then his expression shifted, cold calculation replacing emotional outburst. "Perhaps, but neither of us will live to see what happens next." He reached inside his jacket. Armstrong tensed, expecting a weapon, but instead Schmidt produced a small remote device. "Insurance policy. This entire facility is wired with enough explosives to collapse the mountain. If I cannot succeed, I will at least ensure the bell is never recovered." Armstrong kept his weapon steady. "Put it down, Schmidt. There are people throughout this facility, your own people. Sacrifices for the cause, as it has always been." The standoff was interrupted by the sound of the main entrance doors being breached. Armed figures in tactical gear poured into the chamber, securing the perimeter with practiced efficiency. Armstrong recognized the insignia of Argentine Special Forces, mixed with what appeared to be a United Nations counterterrorism unit. Leading them, weapon drawn and moving with purpose, was Emma. Schmidt saw his plans collapsing completely. With a final look of defiance at Armstrong, he pressed the remote trigger. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then a series of deep, concussive booms echoed through the mountain. Not the facility itself, Armstrong realized with relief, but the access tunnels. Schmidt had sealed the exits, not destroyed the entire complex. "Surrender, Schmidt," Armstrong ordered. "There's nowhere to go." But the man had already turned and was running toward a side passage. Armstrong pursued, followed by Emma and several operators. The passage led to a small, secondary chamber that had clearly been prepared as an escape route. A vertical shaft similar to the one Armstrong and Emma had used for entry was located in the center of the room. Schmidt was already climbing the access ladder when they entered. "Stop," Armstrong commanded, aiming his weapon. Schmidt paused, looking down at his pursuers. In his hand was a second remote device. "This one isn't for show, Captain," he called down. "Dead man's switch. If I release it, targeted charges will destroy the bell itself. Your choice. Let me go, or lose the technology forever." Armstrong exchanged a look with Emma. The bell represented a scientific breakthrough of immense significance, potentially beneficial if properly understood and controlled. But it had also nearly allowed Schmidt to alter history with catastrophic consequences. "Let him go," Armstrong decided, lowering his weapon. "Some technology is too dangerous, regardless of who controls it." Schmidt studied him for a moment, perhaps recognizing the same determination that had driven John Armstrong to destroy the original bell 80 years earlier. "You are very much your grandfather's grandson," Schmidt said, then continued his ascent. As the man disappeared up the shaft, Emma approached her father. "Are you sure about this? He could still be dangerous." Armstrong nodded. "Cortez has his identity, his network, his resources. He'll be a fugitive for the rest of his life, and more importantly, he no longer has the bell." The Argentine forces had secured the facility, apprehending Schmidt's remaining personnel and beginning a systematic assessment of the technology. United Nations observers were documenting everything, ensuring that whatever was discovered would be shared internationally rather than becoming the property of any single government or organization. Armstrong stood before the silent bell, studying the device that had nearly changed the course of human history. Despite the damage to surrounding systems, the apparatus itself appeared largely intact. "What will happen to it?" Emma asked, joining him. "Cortez is coordinating with international authorities. The scientific community will want to study it, understand its principles, but under the strictest controls and oversight." She nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think it could ever have worked? Actually sent information back through time?" "I don't know," Armstrong admitted, "but my grandfather believed it could. He believed it enough to risk his life stopping it. That's good enough for me." Their contemplation was interrupted by a communications officer. "Captain Armstrong, secure call for you and Major Armstrong, General Cortez, priority channel." They moved to the makeshift command center that had been established in the chamber. On a secure video link, Cortez appeared, his expression a mix of relief and gravity. "Thomas, Emma, well done. I've been briefed on the situation. The President has been informed. International protocols for handling potentially civilization-altering technology are being implemented." "Schmidt escaped," Armstrong reported. "He used a dead man's switch thread against the bell to secure his exit." Cortez nodded. "We anticipated something like that. Satellite surveillance has been tracking all movement in the region. We'll find him." "Sir, there's something else you should know. Schmidt mentioned your father, said his grandfather was executed for war crimes after being captured by Richard Cortez." A shadow passed across Cortez's features. "My father never spoke much about his war service, only that he had helped capture some high-value targets in the final days of the European campaign. This explains why he took such an interest in your grandfather's case all those years later." Armstrong nodded, pieces falling into place. "A personal connection, just like the one between us now." "History has a way of repeating itself," Cortez agreed. "Speaking of which, I have news about your grandfather." Armstrong tensed, fearing the worst given John Armstrong's fragile health. "He's had a remarkable improvement," Cortez continued. "The doctors can't explain it, but after your tank experience, he's had extended periods of lucidity. He's been asking for you." Relief flooded through Armstrong. "Tell him we're coming home. Tell him we finished what he started." 3 days later, Armstrong sat beside his grandfather's bed at the military medical facility in Maryland. John Armstrong looked fragile against the white sheets, but his eyes were clear, focused on his grandson with recognition and awareness. "You found it," the old man said, his voice thin but steady. "The second bell." "Yes, Grandpa. We found it, and we stopped it from being used." John Armstrong nodded slowly. "Good, that's good. I always wondered if we got them all, if we did enough." "You did, Grandpa. More than enough." Emma entered the room carrying a small box. "The doctors say not to tire him," she reminded gently. "Just a few more minutes," Armstrong promised. "There's something I want to give him." From the box, he withdrew a weathered leather journal. Doc Harmon's account of the resilient cruise mission. "Michael Harmon Jr. wanted you to have this," Armstrong explained, placing it in his grandfather's hands. "His father's journal. He thought you might want to read about those days from your gunner's perspective." John Armstrong's eyes widened as he recognized the journal. His gnarled fingers traced the worn cover reverently. "Doc," he whispered, "best gunner in the outfit. Steady hands. Never missed." He looked up at Armstrong. "You found his boy?" "Yes, and we found the others' families too. They all survived the war, Grandpa. They all had lives, families, futures because of what you did." Tears welled in the old man's eyes. "Never knew. They separated us. New names, new lives. Never knew what happened to my boys." Armstrong placed a hand over his grandfather's. "They lived, Grandpa. Full lives, and they never forgot the 72 hours you spent behind enemy lines. Never forgot their commander." John Armstrong closed his eyes, tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. 72 hours. Felt like forever. Time moves differently. Near the bell. The old man's strength was clearly fading. Armstrong exchanged a look with Emma, who nodded toward the door, indicating they should let him rest. "We'll come back tomorrow, Grandpa," Armstrong promised, rising. "You get some sleep now." As they turned to leave, John Armstrong's voice stopped them. "Tommy?" "Yes, Grandpa?" "Proud of you, son. You and your girl. So proud." Armstrong felt his own eyes misting. "Thank you, Grandpa. That means everything." 1 month later, a small ceremony took place at Arlington National Cemetery. Despite his remarkable rally, John Armstrong had passed peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks after their return. His final days had been filled with family, recognition, and peace. The burden of his long-kept secrets finally lifted. The ceremony was attended by military personnel, government officials, and most significantly, representatives from all 5 families of the original Resilient crew. Descendants of Doc Harmon, James Reynolds, William Johnson, and Henry Miller stood alongside Armstrong and Emma as full military honors were rendered. General William Cortez, in full-dress uniform, presented Armstrong with the flag that had draped his grandfather's casket. Lieutenant John Armstrong and his crew have been posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, Cortez announced formally. Their mission, classified for 80 years, has now been recognized as one of the most significant contributions to Allied victory in the European theater. The official citation carefully omitted specific details about the bell and its capabilities. Those remain classified, though the scientific community was now engaged in careful study of the recovered technology under international oversight. The world would learn of its potential gradually, with appropriate safeguards. As the ceremony concluded, Armstrong stood with Emma beside the fresh grave, the polished stone bearing John Armstrong's name, rank, and dates of service, along with the simple inscription, 72 hours that changed history. "What happens now?" Emma asked quietly. Armstrong gazed across the ordered rows of white markers stretching into the distance, each one representing service, sacrifice, duty fulfilled, the legacy that connected generations. "We continue," he said simply. "We honor their sacrifice by living the lives they preserved for us. We remember." Emma slipped her hand into his, a gesture that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. The distance between them, built over years of misunderstanding and pain, had been bridged by their shared journey into the past. "I'd like you to come to dinner next week," Armstrong said. "There's a lot of time to make up for, a lot of stories I should have shared with you about your mother, about your grandfather." "I'd like that," Emma replied, squeezing his hand. As they walked together through Arlington's hallowed grounds, Armstrong reflected on the strange symmetry of history. His grandfather had spent 72 hours behind enemy lines to prevent a technology from changing the course of human events. 80 years later, Armstrong and Emma had faced the same challenge, the same stakes, the same 72-hour countdown. Different generations, different wars, same duty, same resolve. Steel resolve passed from grandfather to grandson to granddaughter. A legacy stronger than any technology, more enduring than any regime or ideology. The human determination to stand against darkness, whatever form it might take, whatever era it might threaten. 72 hours had once again preserved history as it was meant to be written. Not by the victors, as Schmidt had claimed, but by the countless ordinary lives lived in freedom because of extraordinary courage in moments that history would never record. That, Armstrong knew, was his grandfather's true legacy. Not the secret mission or the classified technology, but the simple, uncompromising devotion to duty. The willingness to stand in the gap when darkness threatened. The sun was setting over Arlington as they reached their car, casting long shadows across the monuments to American sacrifice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Bell technology still existed. Schmidt remained at large. The knowledge could never be unlearned. But today, in this moment, Armstrong felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The cycle that had begun 80 years ago in a Sherman tank named Resilient had come full circle. The burden his grandfather had carried was now properly distributed across institutions designed to handle such knowledge, across nations committed to preventing its misuse. And most importantly, the fractured bonds of family had been restored. Armstrong and Emma, father and daughter, united by purpose just as he had been united with his grandfather through the decades. As they drove away from Arlington, the weight of the past 3 months settled into perspective. They had faced the echo of history's darkest hour and emerged intact. Whatever came next, they would face it together, carrying forward the legacy of quiet courage that had defined the Armstrong family for generations. 72 hours in hell had forged a bond that would endure for a lifetime.